I now give the floor to the representative of Afghanistan.
Madam President, at the outset, allow me to congratulate Colombia on assuming the presidency of the Council, of the Security Council, and wish you and your team every success this month. And we thank the SRSG, Ms. Ghanaian, and Director Usomo for their sobering briefings. And Ms. Mitra Mehran, for bringing the voices of Afghan women into this chamber. We also thank the Council members and previous speakers for their continued support and solidarity with the people of Afghanistan. Madam President, today I want to share the perspective of ordinary people of Afghanistan, the deep concerns, frustrations, and aspirations they convey to us every day from inside the country. Nearly 5 years after the Taliban's military takeover, Afghanistan remains trapped in a deep political, economic, social, and humanitarian crisis. The facts are clear and well documented. The real question before this Council is whether this situation is sustainable and whether the international community is prepared to move beyond managing the consequences of this crisis toward addressing the root causes in the interest of the Afghan people and the international community. Allow me to highlight 5 realities that cannot be ignored and 5 suggestions or imperatives that should guide our collective response. First, Afghanistan faces a profound human and social crisis. 22 million Afghans, 2/3 of the population, remain dependent on urgent humanitarian assistance. Poverty and unemployment are widespread, economic opportunities are shrinking, and an entire generation of young Afghans and women no longer see a future for themselves in their own country. The loss of human capital, deepening poverty, rising forced and early marriages, psychological distress, and growing criminality are clear signs of a society breaking under the weight of exclusion and injustice. The imperative: Afghanistan needs a national vision focused on job creation, standard and modern education, and human development. The country cannot move forward while excluding large segments of its population from contributing to its future. And most importantly, this vision requires a political horizon that leads to broad-based, legitimate, and representative government that provides the foundation for long-term stability. Second, and that in that context, the Taliban governance has failed the people of Afghanistan. A model of governance designed by the Taliban and exclusively for the Taliban has no accountability to the people it claims to govern. Corruption, the abuse of power, and the concentration of wealth within a narrow circle are well documented. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's mineral wealth is extracted without transparency or public oversight. The Taliban have consistently ignored both the demands of the people of Afghanistan and the repeated appeals of the international community. The imperative: Afghanistan needs a legitimate, accountable, and law-based system of governance that derives its authority from the consent of its people and uses national resources for the benefit of all citizens. Third, the systematic exclusion and discrimination have pushed Afghanistan further into isolation. This year marks the 5 consecutive years in which Afghan girls have been denied access to secondary and higher education. Women have been removed from public life, civil society space have been restricted, and independent media has been subjected to censorship. The Taliban have further codified this discrimination through laws that restrict accountability for domestic violence and permit child marriage under the guise of silent consent. These are not temporary measures. These are deliberate and systematic efforts to exclude half of society from public life, an approach that has absolutely no basis in the true principles of Islam or in Afghanistan's own history and traditions. We remain deeply concerned by the continued and verified reports of arbitrary detention, torture, sexual violence, forced marriages, targeted reprisals, and other serious human rights violations, particularly against women and girls, human rights defenders, former security forces, and media personnel. The imperative, besides the United Nations and the European Union and regional and international organizations, Islamic countries and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation must play a more active role in making clear to the Taliban that these draconian policies not only pose a threat to the future of Afghanistan, but also harm the image of Islam worldwide. The reopening of schools and universities to girls must remain a non-negotiable priority for the international community as a whole. Additionally, monitoring, reporting, and accountability mechanisms should be strengthened and used effectively to end the impunity. Fourth, normalizing the current situation serves neither the people of Afghanistan nor international peace and security. Engagement without tangible results and concessions without behavioral change have not improved governance, human rights, or political inclusion. Normalizing systematic exclusion and political repression will not bring stability. Mixed messages and contradictory approaches have only prolonged the current impasse and emboldened the Taliban. Imperative, the Security Council needs a stronger, more unified, and coherent approach. The message must be clear and consistent. There is no path toward legitimacy or Afghanistan's reintegration into the international community without full respect for human rights, women's rights, inclusive governance, and international obligations. Fifth, the rise of insecurity and the risk of Afghanistan again becoming a platform for extremism and terrorism. The absence of war should not be mistaken for the presence of genuine peace. True peace exists when girls and boys have equal access to quality education, when women can participate fully and meaningfully in society, and when all citizens enjoy their fundamental rights and freedoms without intimidation and prejudice and not forced to armed resistance. The targeted killings of members of the Shia and Hazara communities in public places, including in Injil district of Herat province, alongside the unexplained deaths of civilians, hostage taking, and a female UN staff who murdered 2 days ago, do not reflect genuine peace and security in Afghanistan. Furthermore, the continued expansion of jihadi madrasas and the persistent presence of international terrorist groups, as confirmed by successive UN reports, raise concerns for the people of Afghanistan, raise serious concerns for the people of Afghanistan, the region, and international community. The Taliban's policies and continued links with the terrorist groups have endangered the people of Afghanistan in the past and continue to do so today. But this also presents a threat to regional and international peace and security, and we hope this issue receives the attention it warrants by this Council. The recent escalation of hostilities between Pakistan and the Taliban has added a dangerous new dimension to this crisis and resulted in significant civilian casualties. Particularly alarming was the reported strike on Umaid Drug Rehabilitation Hospital in Kabul, a civilian medical facility where UNAMA verified at least 269 people killed and 122 injured. We strongly condemn all attacks that result in civilian harm, the destruction of critical infrastructure, and violations of Afghanistan's territorial integrity. We ask this Council to condemn and prevent such attacks. No security concern, however legitimate, can justify actions that place civilians at risk or undermine the principles of the United Nations Charter and international humanitarian law. Afghanistan has long been a victim of terrorism, and its people have suffered immensely from its devastating consequences. We therefore also strongly condemn all terrorist attacks in Pakistan and elsewhere and reaffirm the need for collective efforts to combat terrorism in all its forms and manifestations everywhere. The imperative: the international community and regional countries must adopt a comprehensive, coordinated, and principled strategy to address terrorism, violent extremism, and narcotics trafficking. Such threats can only be addressed sustainably through the establishment of a legitimate, inclusive, representative, and accountable government that is committed to upholding its national and international obligations and ensuring that Afghanistan never again becomes a source of instability and insecurity for its people, the region, and wider world. Madam President, all of these realities point to one unavoidable conclusion. At its core, Afghanistan's crisis remains a complex political crisis. Humanitarian and economic assistance remain essential to alleviating suffering, but they cannot substitute for a durable and sustainable political solution. Without a credible political process, we risk pushing Afghanistan towards a civil war. We continue to support the central role of United Nations, the implementation of Security Council Resolution 2721, and efforts to advance credible, inclusive, and Afghan-owned political process that leads to a legitimate, representative, and accountable political order. In this regard, the role of UNAMA remains crucial in facilitating such a process in accordance with its mandate and ensuring the meaningful participation of all credible and relevant stakeholders. As negotiations on renewal of UNAMA's mandate continue, we reiterate our support for preserving a strong, balanced, and effective mandate. We also emphasize the importance of the timely appointment of a highly qualified special representative of Secretary General who possesses deep knowledge of Afghanistan, is firmly committed to impartiality, human rights, and conflict resolution, and is capable of advancing a comprehensive political process aimed at achieving lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan. Madam President, in conclusion, we call on this Council to maintain a strong, unified, and consistent position. There is no path to legitimacy, stability, or reintegration without respect for human rights, inclusive governance, and international law. Engagement with Taliban should be principled and conditioned on measurable and verifiable progress. And all stakeholders, including Islamic countries and OIC, have unique responsibility to make that message heard in Kabul. Accountability mechanisms should be used to end impunity, and effective action against terrorism and extremism ultimately requires a government in Afghanistan that's legitimate and accountable to its people and to the world. The people of Afghanistan are not the cause of this crisis. They are its victims. They want a country where girls can go to school, where young people can look to the future with hope, where women can work, live freely, and where government derives its legitimacy from the will of its people. Helping them achieve the future should remain our shared responsibility. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Madam President, I congratulate Colombia for assuming the presidency of the Council, and thank you for giving me the floor. I thank Ms. Georgia Gagnon, Head of Mission and Deputy SRSG Political of UNAMA, for briefing this meeting. We also take note of Director Bosornu from OCHA and Ms. Mehran for their briefings. India and Afghanistan are contiguous neighbors, and as civilizational states, our ties have spanned centuries. Our history of close cooperation continues to guide our modern-day relationship. The proud people of Afghanistan have endured a lot in this century, and the Government of India will continue to stand in favor of peace and stability so as to foster development and stability in this nation. Our participation in the Doha Working Group meetings and our strong bilateral development partnerships stand testimony to this promise. Madam President, India's capacity building and humanitarian assistance initiatives for the Afghan people can be seen in all 34 provinces and in more than 500 development partnership projects. We are focusing on healthcare, public infrastructure, and capacity building. We are intensifying our cooperation with UN agencies, as well as others such as Afghanistan Red Cross Society, in priority areas of the Afghan people. The visits to India of Afghan ministers last year have ensured necessary planning and coordination so that our support reaches the intended beneficiaries. Generations of Afghans, having suffered years of active hostility, are now suffering neglect of the international community. In April 2026, India delivered 3 tons of specialized flood relief supplies to support communities affected by recent floods. The consignment included kitchen sets, dignity and hygiene kits, plastic sheets, tarpaulin, sleeping bags, and more. In its commitment to strengthen Afghanistan's child immunization program, India has recently delivered 33 tons of BCG and tetanus and diphtheria vaccines and related dry materials to Kabul. It gives us great satisfaction to report that now Afghan children suffering from acute congenital heart diseases are being treated in India. Establishment of maternity clinics in rural areas in Paktika, Khost, and Paktia, upgradation of the Indira Gandhi Institute of Child Health, and construction of oncology and trauma centers in Kabul also underlines our commitment to Afghan women and children. We thank our partner agencies, including UNICEF and Afghan Red Cross Society in this regard. Setting up of an oncology center, a trauma center, and the soon-to-begin installation of advanced medical devices across hospitals and construction of a 30-bed hospital in Kabul and a thalassemia center in Herat will provide much-needed healthcare support. Since August 2021, my country has supplied more than 50,000 tons of wheat, 420 tons of medicines and vaccines, including anti-cancer medicines, and medicines for vector diseases, as well as 40,000 liters of pesticides. The 2 earthquakes that have ravaged Afghanistan last year call for more support. India was among the first to provide humanitarian assistance to the tune of 60 tons of food, 42 tons of earthquake relief materials, and 73 tons of essential medicines. In partnership with the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, we have provided 68 tons of medical supplies and 34 tons of social support items for rehabilitation of drug addicts. In the field of education, our scholarship and fellowship schemes for Afghan students are always in demand. Since 2023, about 3,000 students have availed themselves of these opportunities, including 1,000 Afghan women. Another 1,000 scholarships will also be offered very soon to pursue degree courses and master's courses. India continues to provide financial and logistical support to Afghan self-help groups led by women. Madam President, the display of skill and professionalism by Afghan cricketers during the recently concluded Indian Premier League brought immense joy to all of Afghanistan and to the cricketing world. India is pleased to convey that it is hosting the Afghanistan cricket team for a bilateral series. We hope that this will bring further happiness, encouragement, and a sense of celebration to the people of Afghanistan. Sports have a rare power to lift a nation's spirit, to provide shared moments of pride, hope, and joy. We definitely believe that our Afghan brothers and sisters deserve this. India is also the top destination of Afghan exports. As per the World Bank, 43% of Afghanistan's exports are destined for India. By offering tariff-free access for Afghan goods to Indian markets, we have operationalized a dedicated air freight corridor between India and Afghanistan. We are also supporting Afghan traders by issuing hundreds of gratis long-term business visas who are suffering under unprecedented trade and transit terrorism inflicted upon them by Pakistan's denial of passage for trade. The cynical closure of access for this landlocked country is in total violation of UN declarations on landlocked developing countries and a clear weaponization of their trade and transit vulnerabilities. This blatant Pakistani violation of WTO norms and of the UN Charter and international law should be condemned by the global community. Madam President, the Secretary General's report had noted the dire humanitarian concerns and the rising implications for Afghanistan due to unprecedented scale and pace of forced and involuntary returns under adverse circumstances. This needs the world's attention and necessitates more efforts towards addressing food security, healthcare, water security, and other shelter challenges. The returnees need to be provided housing, basic services, and livelihoods. The Afghan economy is suffering from the additional burden of returnees. To this end, my country is working with UN agencies and of the Afghan authorities to make provisions for housing, food, and other essential items to ease the immense pain that has been inflicted on the Afghan people and support their reintegration. We also reiterate the Secretary General's call on member states to uphold their international obligations in relation to protection and ensure that returns are voluntary, safe, dignified, and accompanied by sustained support for reintegration of returnees into communities. India would like to emphasize the importance of UNAMA and its mandate and underline our full support to UNAMA in these challenging times as it endeavors to promote peace and stability in Afghanistan. Pakistan, in its statement earlier today, questioned the intent of UNAMA and the veracity of UNSG's report. We would like to stress that support for multilateralism and the United Nations is not an a la carte menu. Pakistan's campaign of military airstrikes against Afghanistan is causing huge civilian casualties and sufferings to the Afghan people. We reiterate Secretary General's deep concern at civilian casualties caused by airstrikes, cross-border firing, and targeted killings as detailed in UNAMA reports. We support the Secretary General's call urging compliance with obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensuring protection of civilians. We also support UNAMA's earlier calls for investigation to ensure accountability, prevent recurrence, and uphold victims' rights. Such unconscionable acts of violence are a blatant assault on Afghanistan's sovereignty and a threat to the region's peace and stability. India strongly condemns the airstrikes on Afghan territory, which are flagrant violations of international law and the UN Charter and the principle of state sovereignty. According to UNAMA, 372 civilians have been killed and 397 injured just in the first 3 months of this year. A large majority of them during the holy month of Ramadan, a time of peace, mercy, and reflection, which makes the act all the more reprehensible. We reiterate UNAMA's call for compliance with obligations under international humanitarian law, including the principles of precaution, distinction, and proportionality to protect civilians from harm. No faith, no law, and no morality can justify these actions. Let me reiterate, dressing up a massacre as a military operation does not absolve the perpetrator. Killing, maiming, and orphaning civilians is not counter-terrorism. Espousing high principles of international law and Islamic solidarity while mercilessly carrying out airstrikes during the holy month of Ramadan is a perfect example of hypocrisy. Blaming neighbors for its own failures is an old Pakistani habit. This attempt to hoodwink the world will fail. Coming up with official notifications directing Pakistan's government agencies to start referring to groups inside its own borders as Fitna al-Hindustan is nothing but officially sponsored misinformation and disinformation dressed in religious terminology. This is an outcome of an organized factory of hate coming from the deep state of Pakistan, which aims to keep their citizens in a state of permanent hostility with India in order to perpetuate their stay in power and control of national resources and detract them from core political and economic problems. The de facto coup by the military through the 27th Constitutional Amendment is only its most recent manifestation. India stands steadfast in rejecting terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Only coordinated efforts of the international community can ensure that ISIL and Al-Qaeda and their affiliates, including the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and proxies of the LET such as the Resistant Front, along with those who facilitate their operations, no longer indulge in cross-border terrorism. We call on the international community to work together towards this noble goal. Madam President, we lend our voice again in re-emphasizing the importance of incentivizing positive actions. The political reality of Afghanistan has changed in the last 5 years, and the current UN sanctions regime must take that into account. The UN and the international community need policy instruments that aim to benefit the people of Afghanistan and nudge policy in the right direction, rather than only wielding tools of punishment that are yielding diminishing returns. The international community must engage with all stakeholders across all formats. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of India. A request to make a new statement has been made by the representative of Pakistan. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I have, in fact, been compelled to respond to some of the comments that have been made from the floor by the representatives of Afghanistan. I shouldn't say a representative because, Mr. Faik is occupying the seat, and I fully sympathize and empathize with him and about his predicament. But he's not representing anyone from Afghanistan. In fact, we listened to Ms. Mehran today in this meeting, who is actually representing the civil society. So Mr. Faik doesn't even have those credentials. But on the whole, he made a statement that made a lot of sense, except for his remarks about Pakistan's counterterrorism operations. And this was unfortunate, because we have explained in our statement as to what was the rationale for those remarks. And let me repeat, the Pakistan's actions, including those conducted in March, were directed solely against the terrorist and military support infrastructure that is operating from Afghanistan. And it is in no way directed against the brotherly people of Afghanistan. So these targets included drone storage and technical support infrastructure and ammunition storage sites, which were being used by the Afghan Taliban regime to carry out attacks against innocent Pakistani civilians. And these strikes were precise, deliberate, and professional. No hospital, or drug rehabilitation center, or civilian facility was targeted by these strikes. And as part of established practice, video footage of all 6 strikes was released by the Ministry of Information shortly after the operation, clearly showing the nature of the targets. The secondary explosions visible in the footage further confirmed that ammunition storage facilities were indeed struck with precision. So all insinuations to the contrary are not based on facts and are in fact just propaganda. Secondly, Madam President, we had this discussion today based on the report from the Secretary General. We heard statements from council members and other members who are not members of the council. And you would have noticed that this discussion represented a complex situation, and a lot of concerns were expressed by council members and non-council members. And the 3 key expectations of the international community were at the core of this discussion. And that means the inclusive governance, good governance, human rights, women and girls' rights, and counterterrorism. This third commitment that Afghan soil will not be allowed to be used for terrorism against any country. These were at the core, at the heart of discussion. And we clearly heard that there were condemnations, there were expressions of concern with regard to all three of these points, which are the main expectations of the international community from the Afghan Taliban. And there were clear demands from the majority of those who took the floor for the Taliban regime to comply with those commitments. And maybe, perhaps, with the exception of one delegate, and that was India. So I feel obliged to respond to that as well. In fact, it does not come as a surprise to us hearing comments made by the Indian representative, who has since left. And we listened to, in fact, a long list of so-called development and humanitarian activities and support that India is purportedly carrying out in Afghanistan. It seemed that it was just a long prelogue to something that he actually intended to say and something that he actually wanted to utilize and abuse this forum. And that was to target Pakistan. So to us, it is absolutely clear. India's key aims and objectives, even though under the disguise of development or humanitarian assistance, its key aims and objectives in Afghanistan are solely driven by the singular goal of destabilizing Pakistan, including by using terrorist groups operating from Afghan soil. And that includes the TTP, which so many of my colleagues around the table condemned, and the BLA, which acts as a proxy of India to perpetrate terrorism inside Pakistan. And in fact, I thank him because I omitted myself from mentioning this, but I thank him for recalling to everyone in the council and those who were listening that BLA, its other name, is Fitna al-Hindustan. Yes, that's what it is. It is an organization that is supported and financed by India to destabilize and target Pakistan. And I think for some time we are amused perhaps to listen to India's newfound love for the Taliban. We know all the history, what's there in the background, all those years where we knew what India's position was. But for us, this is not a coincidence. It comes, this shift of policy comes at the heels of Pakistan's successful counterterrorism operations against the terrorist hideouts and camps that are operating inside Afghanistan with the active support of India. And as I said before, Mr. Faik for once condemned terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, which is directed towards Pakistan, which is impacting Pakistan, which is costing us lives of hundreds of Pakistani nationals, including women and children, our security and law enforcement personnel. But I'm sure you would have noticed that not once did the representative of India condemn the TTP or the BLA, yes, Fitna al-Hindustan, who have been carrying out attacks targeting innocent Pakistanis who have tragically lost their lives at the hands of these terrorists. We are not astonished. We are not surprised at all, because we know very well that India's hostile policies and complicity is further validated by the remarks of its representative today. And I seriously believe that this behavior should be a cause of concern for the Security Council and the international community. Because I was mentioning earlier, more than 1,200 Pakistanis lost their lives last year alone. They were human beings with families, like all of us, with ambitions, with hopes for a better future. But they were silenced by a group of cowardly terrorists backed by a country whose representative was trying to lecture this council, and in fact, in process, was actually trying to mask its own involvement in this bloodshed that is happening in Pakistan. So it is obviously, it must be discomforting for India to see its terrorist infrastructure being dismantled and destroyed in Afghanistan by Pakistan's valiant security forces, who I must say, and I repeat, who will continue to do whatever is necessary for our self-defense. India was calling on others to comply with international law and adhere to the dictates of humanity. It would be laughable if we are not aware of India's own record, and if the matter under consideration in the Council was not that serious. For we know that India's true face is truly exposed before the international community. It is a serial violator of international law. For decades, it has been an illegal occupation of Jammu and Kashmir, which is an international dispute on the agenda of this council, and where it has been engaged in gross and systematic violations of human rights in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And we were talking of violations of human rights, of women's rights, and girls' rights in Afghanistan. How can we be quiet about violations, these grave, persistent, systematic violations of human rights, which have been reported and corroborated by the international community, by human rights organizations, by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the United Nations, that India has been perpetrating in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir for decades. And it's not just that, because India talks about democracy and rule of law. While we are also aware of its own conduct inside its country, its persecution of minorities, including Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, and others, against Indian citizens who dare not raise their voice. It talks about disinformation. It has its whole, the entire national media is under control of the BJP's government. Total control of narrative. And it is a state sponsor of terrorism, not just in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir or in Pakistan using the Afghan soil, but it is openly aiding, abetting, and financing terrorism elsewhere. Extraterritorial assassinations. The international community is now well aware of it. In North America, in Canada, in this country, the US, everything is exposed. And it talks of international law. It is in serious breach of Security Council resolutions on Jammu and Kashmir. It has seriously violated the Indus Waters Treaty by declaring that it is holding it in abeyance without any reason, justification, in complete defiance of the treaty's provisions and international law. There's so many things that I could have continued to say. It was talking about cricket and sportsman spirit, and we know the sportsman spirit when it refuses to play or if it refuses to shake hands with the players. This is a country that is coming to the council and telling us what cricket and sports could bring in terms of peace and harmony. So, Madam President, I think we should seriously consider also how we allow countries to take the floor in this council, and under what rules and etiquette they should be speaking in this council. And my advice simply would be for India to do a little bit of introspection, and that it can do by discontinuing its policies of aggression, subversion, and sabotage against neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan. And it must look inwards and try to address its own problems rather than spreading disinformation and politicizing debates and discussions. Pakistan is well aware of India's motives and evil designs, but we will not allow them to nourish terrorists and threaten our national security. I would say that we have stopped them before, and we will do it again, and we will do it always. I thank you.
I wish to thank the representative of Pakistan for that statement. Very briefly indeed, I wish to give the floor to Afghanistan.
Madam President, I had not intended to take the floor, but I'm compelled to briefly respond to the remarks made by the representative of Pakistan, particularly the personal references directed at me. First, I would respectfully urge all delegations to uphold the standards of decorum and mutual respect that should guide our work in this chamber. Personal attacks do not advance constructive dialogue. And second, Ambassador Assem, I am proud to represent Afghanistan and speak on behalf of millions of Afghans whose voices deserve to be heard. And I am a proud representative of a democratically elected government that was toppled by the same group, the Taliban, that was supported by your government in Pakistan. And today you're complaining about it. My remarks were not directed against the people of Pakistan, to whom we are grateful for their graciously hosting Afghan refugees in very difficult times, but against policies that have had profound consequences for Afghanistan and increasingly for the region. For years, Afghan governments emphasized on genuinely combating terrorism without any distinctions, and warned about the double standards, adverse consequences, and dangers of supporting and harboring the Taliban and other proxy groups. Those warnings were ignored. Today, Pakistan itself is confronting many of the same challenges Afghanistan warned about. Third, Afghan people must not pay the price of Pakistan's failed policies and Taliban's actions, and neither they cannot afford the proxy or regional rivalries between Pakistan and India. Afghanistan wants to stay independent, and Afghan people should not be victims. You cannot expect TTA, which is the Taliban in Afghanistan, to prevent TTP from attack against Pakistan, or combating terrorism requires a responsible, legitimate, and government committed to its national and international obligations in Afghanistan. Finally, neither airstrikes nor exchange of blame will bring peace and security to Afghanistan or Pakistan. What is needed is a paradigm shift in policies, and through constructive engagement, non-interference, mutual respect, dialogue, and genuine commitment to addressing the underlying causes of instability. As a neighboring country and as a member of this council, and on behalf of the Asia-Pacific Group, Pakistan is well positioned to support an inclusive and sustainable political process in which the Afghan people themselves determine the future of their country. I thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, sir, for that statement. I also now wish to give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President, and apologies for taking the floor again, and I don't want to belabor the point, but this is exactly what I was saying. There are many things that need to be addressed in how the situation in Afghanistan can best be tackled by the international community. And the council members, the members of the international community, they have their views. They share those views, and we have an exchange, and we see how this is to be done and in what best possible manner. For example, the role of UNAMA. We are negotiating, we are discussing a draft resolution that will renew the mandate of UNAMA. But the point here is that we need to have this discussion with anyone who represents anyone in some capacity. And the comments that we received are not very useful. Pakistan knows what are our responsibilities. And Pakistan engages in dialogue and diplomacy also. And Pakistan also knows how to protect its citizens against terrorism. I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Declaro abierta la sesión.
I call to order the 10,165th meeting of the Security Council. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Afghanistan, India, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Ms. Georgette Gagnon, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Afghanistan and Officer in Charge of UNAMA. Ms. Edem Wasonu, Director of the Crisis Response Division in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, and Ms. Mitra Mehran, Founder of the Afghanistan Justice Archive. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Agenda Item 2. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to Document S/2026/431, that is the report of the Secretary General on the situation in Afghanistan and its implications for international peace and security. I now give the floor to Ms. Georgette Gagnon.
Mr. President, over the past weeks, I've traveled across to Afghanistan to remote areas, northern provinces, and to eastern border areas. In these visits, I've heard a consistent message from Afghan people, returnees, business owners, earthquake and conflict-affected families, rural and urban communities, and from women and girls. All have highlighted the increasing pressures they face, whether humanitarian, economic, or on human rights. On the surface, Afghanistan, under the de facto authorities, remains stable. Territorial and administrative control has been consolidated, and there is no meaningful armed or political challenge to their rule. The de facto authorities themselves present their main achievement as having delivered nationwide peace and security. The longer-term scenarios for Afghanistan, however, depend largely on internal dynamics within the de facto authorities' governing structure, in particular the tension between ideological policies that place severe burdens on the Afghan people and relatively pragmatic approaches that have helped sustain the system so far. For now, what exists is increasing control by the de facto authorities without a clear end state. In this context of accumulating risk and uncertainty, I highlight 5 interlinked areas: political and economic dynamics, the situation of women and girls, broader human rights developments, regional dynamics, and the importance of sustained, unified international engagement. Mr. President, macroeconomic indicators reflect elements of stabilization. Economic growth has been positive in absolute terms, with some long-term investments in infrastructure, fiscal stability has been maintained, and revenue mobilization has improved despite challenges such as sanctions, wider regional tensions, and closure of the eastern border since last October. Relative stability has also allowed for positive measures, such as the sustained near eradication of poppy cultivation. Key risks remain, however, that underscore the fragility of current economic stabilization efforts with serious political impacts. The most significant is demographic. Large-scale returns from neighboring countries have led to a sudden population increase. Nearly 5.9 million people have returned since 2023, amounting to more than a 10% increase in population. Up to 2.8 million Afghans are projected to return this year, many with limited assets and few livelihood prospects. Afghans are returning to communities and an economy that cannot fully reintegrate them. As the World Bank has reported, in real terms, Afghans are becoming poorer. To help mitigate this stress, we reinforce the Secretary General's call on all countries returning Afghans to Afghanistan to uphold their international obligations on protection, including the principle of non-refoulement, and ensure that returns are voluntary, safe, dignified, and accompanied by sustained support for returnees' reintegration. Afghanistan also remains one of the world's largest humanitarian crises. Some 21.9 million people, approximately 45% of the population, require humanitarian assistance in 2026. Mr. President, Afghanistan's demographic profile is also central to understanding its trajectory. More than half the population is under the age of 25. This generation is coming of age at a time of constrained opportunity, particularly for girls, but also increasingly for boys. Many are looking elsewhere for a future. There are economic drivers, limited employment prospects, declining household incomes, and rising competition for scarce jobs, particularly in urban areas already under strain from returnee populations. There are environmental pressures. Afghanistan continues to experience prolonged drought conditions, water scarcity, and ecosystem degradation. These factors are undermining agricultural livelihoods. the primary source of income for more than 70% of the Afghan people, and accelerating rural distress. The convergence of these trends multiplies existing risks, creating conditions conducive to increased migration, social, political, and economic alienation, rising insecurity, and potential radicalization. Mr. President, on the situation of Afghan women and girls, it is important to be very clear. What we are witnessing are severe and growing restrictions, the imposition of systemic and institutionalized harm with long-term generational consequences for Afghan society as a whole. An estimated 3.8 million girls between 7 and 18 years of age are not in school, including more than 2.6 million adolescent girls. Each year, approximately 250,000 more girls are permanently excluded from secondary education pathways, creating a lost generation of talent and potential. This has implications far beyond education. Recent UNICEF analysis makes clear that restrictions on women's education and labor participation are already costing the Afghan economy and undermining the country's longer-term economic development. Sectors such as health and education are experiencing a decline in qualified female professionals, with projections indicating the loss of more than 25,000 skilled workers by 2030. This directly affects service delivery. It reduces access to health care for Afghan people, particularly women and children, and worsens maternal and child health outcomes. These costs, both human and financial, will only worsen and compound over time. The solution requires the de facto authorities to end restrictions on education and employment for women and girls to the benefit of all Afghans, and to support opening a new chapter in Afghanistan's relations with the international community. In this context, the continued exclusion of UN female national staff from UN premises reminds us every day of the harmful impact of restrictions on Afghan women across the country. We again urge the de facto authorities to lift all restrictions on women and girls, including those affecting access of UN national female staff to our premises, a violation of the UN Charter. We are also observing broader trends in the erosion of human rights that warrant increased attention. Recent Decree number 18 on separation of spouses violates core principles of the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, as well as children's rights. It is among the most recent of several decrees and actions that serve to institutionalize a system that is increasingly divergent from Afghanistan's international human rights obligations. And these include recent reports of the detention of some 30 women in Herat by de facto representatives of the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice and Police for allegedly not meeting the Taliban dress code. Recent arrests of journalists and closing of some media outlets highlight declining freedom of expression and the continuing narrowing of civic space. Mr. President, relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan remain strained, with continued border closures, security incidents, and military signaling. The impacts are immediate, as outlined in the Secretary General's report. Border closures disrupt trade flows, reduce access to markets, and increase the cost of goods. They also impede humanitarian operations and restrict access to vulnerable populations. Civilian casualties associated with cross-border incidents, as documented in the Secretary General's report, and UNAMA's reporting underscore the human impacts of this conflict. On both sides of the border, civilians bear the cost of political differences that must be resolved diplomatically. UNAMA reiterates its call for sustained efforts towards de-escalation and a durable ceasefire, agreement on reopening of border crossings, particularly for humanitarian assistance, and peaceful dialogue to resolve differences, including on the continued presence of terrorist groups on Afghan soil, as reported by the Sanctions Monitoring Team. We welcome the ongoing efforts of member states to reduce tensions and open channels for dialogue between Pakistan and Afghanistan's de facto authorities. Mr. President, on UNAMA's efforts to guide a political process leading to the end state defined in Security Council Resolution 2721 of 2023, I reiterate that engagement is not endorsement of the current regime. It is necessary for situational awareness, to facilitate dialogue, and to better support the Afghan people. It contributes to the ability to monitor, contain, address, and mitigate risks to the international community. Across Afghanistan, at its headquarters and 8 field offices around the country, UNAMA and the United Nations system continues to operate as an active presence, engaging daily with communities and Afghan people, supporting humanitarian and basic human needs assistance, and monitoring, reporting, and taking action on real-time political and human rights developments on the ground. UNAMA also engages constantly with the de facto authorities across the country. While significant differences exist, the channels for dialogue are open and frank. The Doha process is the current format in which dialogue on key political issues take place, a multilateral framework that brings together international and regional actors for structured engagement with the de facto authorities towards the Security Council affirmed end state. Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, fully reintegrated into the international community, and meeting its international obligations for the Afghan people's benefit. 3 years after the first meeting of the Special Envoy's Afghanistan, there has been some progress on a comprehensive approach that serves the Afghan people and supports the international community's objectives. More is needed, however, as highlighted in the Secretary General's report. We reinforce the Secretary General's call on the Doha process participants to sustain engagement in this comprehensive approach that supports Afghanistan's eventual reintegration. The de facto authorities are encouraged to establish a structured mechanism for further engagement with UNAMA on this approach. Member states, in their interactions with the de facto authorities, should continue to make clear that reintegration remains possible through concrete, balanced, cooperative steps that build confidence and aim to resolve the underlying issues preventing Afghanistan's reintegration into the international system, including the imperative to meet international obligations. UNAMA remains invested in achieving this Council's affirmed end state for Afghanistan. Ongoing and constant dialogue is essential, together with principled and pragmatic engagement, even where progress towards the end state is incremental. With strategic patience, coherent and coordinated diplomacy, and open dialogue, progress can be made in full support of the Afghan people. Thank you.
Doy las gracias a la señora.
I thank Ms. Gagnon for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Idem Wasonu.
Thank you, Mr. President.
We cannot hear you properly. Can you double check, please?
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I will focus on two issues: the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan and the application of the humanitarian exception provided through Security Council Resolution 2615. Afghanistan remains one of the world's largest, most complex humanitarian crises. Nearly half the country needs help, driven by insecurity, economic fragility, climate shocks, large-scale population movement, and restrictions that hit women and girls the hardest. You have heard that from my colleague, Georgette Gagnon, OIC for the mission. Mr. President, in late February, fighting re-erupted between Afghanistan and Pakistan, displacing over 100,000 people across the eastern and southeastern regions, causing several hundred civilian casualties. Already, struggling families were pushed even closer to the edge. Around 17,000 families in two districts in Nuristan province, who were already on WFP's famine watch list, were cut off from all aid for almost 2 months. Damage to health facilities and schools disrupted services for tens of thousands. While a ceasefire in April has led to a reduction in violence, explosive weapons contamination continues to pose a deadly threat, especially to children. The conflict has also disrupted critical supply chains, with a continued border closure affecting humanitarian programs, especially food security and nutrition. A reopening of the border is urgently required to keep the response moving. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, hunger is growing across Afghanistan. Today, 4.7 million people are at risk of severe food insecurity, what we call IPC Phase 4, which is 50% higher than during the same time last year. Some 3.7 million children are facing acute malnutrition. We continue to receive alarming reports of families forced into desperate choices, including selling daughters simply to survive. At the same time, cross-border returns continue. So far in 2026, 736,000 Afghans have returned, mostly from Pakistan, adding pressure on host communities and cities already struggling to provide basic services. Natural hazards are adding another layer of suffering. Spring flooding has killed almost 100 people and destroyed or damaged tens of thousands of homes, alongside health facilities, schools, bridges, hundreds of kilometers of roads, and vital crops. The burden of this crisis is falling especially hard on women. Women-headed households in Afghanistan continue to face some of the highest levels of food insecurity and economic hardship, leaving many mothers to face impossible trade-offs about how to feed and protect their families. Mr. President, activities supporting women and girls continue to be disproportionately affected by de facto authorities and restrictions, with at least 6 women's spaces closed in Herat province since March, and the suspension of livelihoods activities for women. Female staff have also been stopped in Herat for what the de facto authorities claimed to be inappropriate dress. And over the weekend, we have received reports of dozens of women arrested due to alleged non-compliance with existing strict dress codes, including women health workers. Across the country, Afghan women remain barred from UN premises, as you've heard, a ban that has now entered its 10th month. These constraints are not abstract. They have direct consequences on our ability to reach people in need. Women and girls already face severe barriers in Afghanistan. They cannot attend school after the age of 12. They have limited opportunities for employment, and they face restricted access to basic services. When women humanitarian workers are allowed to do their jobs, more women and children can get the support they need. When they are pushed out, their needs often go unmet. Mr. President, despite these obstacles, humanitarians continue to deliver. Between January and March, 4.9 million people were reached with at least one form of humanitarian assistance under the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan. Let me turn to the humanitarian exception provided under Resolution 2615. This marks the 9th briefing to the Council since the adoption of the resolution in December 2021. The message today is clear. This exception is working. Life-saving humanitarian assistance continues to reach millions of people across Afghanistan. The exception provides the clarity needed for the routine operational payments that make aid delivery essential services possible. These include everyday operational costs behind all responses, rent on state-owned premises, the withholding of taxes on NGO staff income, utilities such as water and electricity, as well as visas and permits, security for UN compounds and movements, and other fees essential to delivering assistance, including imports, landing costs, licensing, communication equipment, and municipal charges. Since the adoption of Resolution 2615, humanitarian organizations have seen real improvements in access to financial services for aid groups. The proportion of organizations reporting difficulties in transferring funds into and out of Afghanistan has fallen dramatically, from 87% in October 2021, before the exemption was secured, to around 15% as of May this year. Our partners are reporting faster transfers and the re-engagement of correspondent banking relationships. Reliance on informal transfer mechanisms continue to decline, with only 16% of organizations reporting the use of Hawala or other service providers as of May 2026, down significantly from previous years. Mr. President, even with this progress, we are still working in a very difficult environment. Bureaucratic and administrative obstacles continue to slow down aid delivery. Restrictions continue to affect humanitarian workers, especially, as you've heard, again, women. And humanitarian organizations face pressure to influence who receives aid, who gets contracts, alongside with the ongoing, of course, risk that aid may be diverted. We take these risks seriously and we manage them. Aid is delivered under strong monitoring and due diligence systems, limiting opportunities for malfeasance and ensuring that any concerns are promptly investigated and addressed. Post-distribution monitoring, verification processes, vetting and rescreening of financial service providers, and the establishment of interagency feedback and complaints mechanisms have all been implemented. If concerns arise, distributions are paused. Any issues are addressed in consultation with all relevant stakeholders, including local authorities as well as donors. Operations only resume once clear compliance conditions are met. An example of this thorough risk assessment process can be seen in allegations of potential aid diversion in Kunar province, including a cash-related activity. The partner was immediately notified and an additional round of post-distribution monitoring and inquiries were initiated to ascertain the claims. A review of beneficiaries found no evidence of fraud or diversion. We take this very seriously. The collective and coordinated efforts of the humanitarian country team to mitigate risks directly support the effective and responsible implementation of Resolution 2615, which is essential to the timely delivery of assistance in Afghanistan. Mr. President, Afghanistan's humanitarian crisis is not standing still. It is evolving and in several respects deteriorating under the combined pressure of rising needs, declining resources, and restrictions on women. The response is being severely constrained by underfunding. This year's response requires US $1.71 billion to reach 17.5 million people in Afghanistan. So far, we've received only 15% of that funding. The consequences are already being felt. Compared to last year, the reach of the response has fallen by 40%, with 3 million fewer people assisted. Without urgent funding, WFP warns that famine prevention activities for approximately 1.5 million people in high-risk areas will be cut. Support for families at several key border points is also at risk. Mr. President, I conclude with 3 requests of this Council. First, continue supporting principled humanitarian action in Afghanistan, including through the full implementation of Resolution 2615. Afghan civilians, again, especially women and girls, have suffered enough. They should not face further cuts due to the policies of the de facto authorities. Second, use your influence to press the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure, and for humanitarians to be able to reach all people in need. Women, humanitarian workers must be able to fully and safely do their jobs, and women and girls must have access to life-saving support. Third and final, urgently step up flexible and predictable funding. Without more support, we'll be forced to cut back even further when people need us the most. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank Ms. Idem-Wassono for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Mitra Miran.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to brief you today. My name is Mitra Mehran. I'm the founder of Afghanistan's Justice Archive, a digital repository that documents both the Taliban's repression through directives and decrees, as well as the resistance of women in Afghanistan, in the hope that they will secure justice one day. Our documentation substantiates what women from Afghanistan mean when they call the situation in the country gender apartheid, a systematic, an institutionalized, and deliberate framework of gender-based oppression. Since August 2021, the Taliban have enacted over 230 decrees, including the 2024 regulation on the promotion of virtue and the prevention of vice, directly targeting women, girls, LGBTQI+ individuals because of their gender, by denying them nearly every fundamental human right, including to education, employment, health, the freedom of speech, freedom of movement, in religion or belief. The Taliban have even criminalized women's faces and voices. Earlier this year, in January 2026, the Taliban enacted a criminal procedure code that builds upon the PVPV law by formalizing discrimination, legalizing violence against women, and dividing society into the free and the enslaved. It criminalizes same-sex sexual conduct with punishment including death. Men effectively own their wives and are explicitly permitted to discipline women using physical punishment as long as their bones are not broken and their skin is not bruised. The code treats men as the primary legal authority within the justice system. Further, the criminal procedure code imposes severe punishments, including lashing, imprisonment, and even death, for criticizing Taliban's leadership, and criminalizes failure to report meetings of, I quote, opponents of the government. In a context where civil society, journalists, and human rights defenders are already facing reprisals in retaliation for their work, this provision further institutionalizes the Taliban's repression. In May, the Taliban ratified the Code on Judicial Separation of Spouses, which effectively permits child marriage and further limits women's ability to obtain a separation or divorce. Afghanistan's ethnic and religious groups, especially women from Shia and Ismaili communities, often face the most severe forms of violence and political exclusion at the hands of the Taliban. The Taliban punish any violations of their decrees with violence, imprisonment, torture, or even death. Moreover, while the muhtasibs enforce the Taliban's vice and virtue policies in public spaces, the system also deliberately compels ordinary men to police the behavior of their female relatives. For women, there is no freedom within or outside the home. Over the past 4 years, I have worked with women who resist. They have faced house raids, arbitrary arrests, imprisonment, sexual violence, including forced nudity, rape, gang rape, torture, and even death, in retaliation for their activism. Gender apartheid has also pushed Afghanistan into an escalating humanitarian crisis. Today, 21.9 million people need humanitarian assistance, and over 10.7 million of them are women and girls. Yet, women aid workers in Afghanistan themselves face restrictions and exclusion, including bans on entering UN premises, rendering effective and principled humanitarian aid impossible. How can women deliver or receive it when they are not allowed to be seen by or speak to men? The Taliban's oppression of women is not incidental, but central to their model of governance. They have created a system of total control. Despite the Taliban's growing repression and complete lack of accountability, some members of the international community are increasingly normalizing relations with the Taliban. Continued engagement with the Taliban has not made them more open to the international community, as some had hoped, but rather emboldened them to further institutionalize their oppression. There has been a lack of clarity from the international community about how it envisions ongoing political processes. This has created profound fear, uncertainty, and distrust among people in Afghanistan. For instance, the Doha process, intended to reintegrate Afghanistan into the international community on the condition that it complies with its international obligations, has lost much of its legitimacy by excluding women and diverse stakeholders and actors in Afghanistan in order to secure Taliban's participation. The mosaic approach has similarly thus far failed to provide a clear roadmap for principled engagement, that is, engagement rooted in measurable benchmarks, including safeguards to protect the human rights of all people in Afghanistan, and stipulating consequences should the engagement yield no results. Since August 2021, the Security Council has adopted several resolutions and press statements condemning the Taliban's restrictions. Yet, what meaningful follow-up or accountability has actually taken place? When violations are repeatedly condemned without consequences, questions about international complicity inevitably arise. The women and girls of Afghanistan cannot afford international inaction. Despite our constant disappointment, we still do not believe that the answer is to walk away from these systems. We are pursuing every pathway available to us, whether through the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, or codification of gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. We know that we cannot afford to abandon them because our lives depend on whether these institutions, including this Council, uphold the principles they were created to defend. Excellencies, finally, I turn to your current negotiations on UNAMA's future. Over the last few years, the challenge has not been the strength of UNAMA's mandate, but rather the need for its robust implementation. A concern repeatedly raised by civil society in Afghanistan. Given the deepening rights crisis in the country, I urge you to ensure that UNAMA's mandate remains firmly grounded in human rights, and that it is tasked with prioritizing implementation of this Council's resolutions on the women, peace, and security agenda across its work. Political or diplomatic engagement with the Taliban must not come at the expense of the rights, dignity, and meaningful participation of women and girls. UNAMA also needs to impartial and principled leadership at its helm by appointing a special representative who will prioritize the concern of the people of Afghanistan in discharging UNAMA's mandate. I conclude by urging the Security Council, UNAMA, and the international community to do the following. Refrain from political and diplomatic engagement that normalizes the Taliban's repressive policies, including hosting, accrediting, or entering into any agreements with the Taliban. As Taliban repression deepens in Afghanistan, now more than ever, we need the international community to prioritize principles over pragmatism. And I want to repeat, prioritize principles over pragmatism. Ensure the full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation of women of Afghanistan, as well as civil society organizations, human rights defenders, victims, and survivor groups, and political opposition groups, both in UNAMA's work as well as in all UN-led political processes, including the Doha process and future discussions regarding inclusive governance. Create and expand emergency protection and resettlement pathways for at-risk women, and refrain from forcibly returning any refugees or asylum seekers to Afghanistan. Provide independent local civil society organizations financial and political support to sustain their critical work in Afghanistan. Scale up humanitarian assistance to meet growing needs. However, to ensure principled humanitarian delivery, aid actors must not comply with any Taliban restrictions that exclude or discriminate against women. UNAMA's advocacy for human rights, including the rights of women, girls, and LGBTQI+ individuals, is critical. It must also strengthen its human rights monitoring and reporting, especially on violations affecting women, girls, and marginalized communities, and reprisals against women human rights defenders. Member states should support all monitoring and accountability efforts, including through the ICC and UN special procedures. Ensure financial support for the independent investigative mechanism for Afghanistan, and support efforts to codify gender apartheid in the Crimes Against Humanity Treaty. Excellencies, the longer the Taliban's repressive rule is allowed to continue, the more lasting its damage on the lives of Afghanistan women and girls will be. States and international community and institutions have legal obligation under international law to act now. And we intend to hold the international community to account. This is not only our fight. It is a test for our global system. It is a test of multilateralism, and a test of whether the principles recited in chambers like this truly means anything in practice. Thank you.
Doy las gracias a la señora Meran.
I thank Ms. Mehran for her briefing. I now give the floor to council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the delegation of China.
President, I thank Deputy Special Representative Ganyu, Director Wasunu, and Ms. Mehran for their respective briefings. At present, the situation in Afghanistan is stable on the whole, yet the challenges in the humanitarian development and counter-terrorism fields remain complex and severe. The Afghan authorities and the international community should move in the same direction, enhance mutual understanding and trust, take more proactive measures, effectively improve the well-being of the people, and promote lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan. I wish to make 4 points. First, it is essential to maintain the momentum of pragmatic engagement. In recent years, Afghanistan has strengthened exchanges and cooperation with the international community, especially regional countries, playing an important role in maintaining regional stability and promoting economic development. We call on all parties to maintain dialogue and engagement with the Afghan authorities, continuously bridge differences, build consensus, and encourage Afghanistan to better respond to the concerns of the international community. We support the continued effective role of regional cooperation platforms, such as the mechanism for coordination and cooperation among Afghan's neighboring countries, the Moscow format, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as the UN-led Doha process in helping Afghan address various challenges and reintegrate into the international community at an early date. The Security Council Committee, established pursuant to Resolution 1988, should actively support Member States' applications for travel ban exemptions and expeditiously resume a package arrangement for such exemptions in order to provide the necessary facilitation for engagement and dialogue. Second, efforts must be intensified to improve livelihoods. Despite the positive efforts made by the Afghan authorities, the humanitarian crisis and the poverty in Afghanistan have become more acute due to factors such as sharp reduction in external assistance, large-scale refugee returns, frequent natural disasters, and instability in the Middle East. According to the UN data, nearly half of Afghanistan's population requires humanitarian assistance. More than 3/4 cannot meet their basic needs, and less than 20% of the required humanitarian funding has been secured this year. Behind these stark figures are tens of millions of Afghans, including women and children, struggling with hunger and disease. We call on traditional donors to increase assistance to Afghanistan, with countries bearing historical responsibilities taking the lead. The countries concerned should fully return Afghan central bank's overseas assets, lift illegal unilateral sanctions imposed on Afghanistan, and support the rebuilding of its financial system. The Doha process working groups on private sector development and counter-narcotics should strive for more early deliverables, helping Afghan enhance its capacity for self-reliant development and deliver tangible benefits to the local population. Third, the basic rights of the Afghan people must be effectively safeguarded. The Secretary-General's report notes that Afghanistan has, for the 5th consecutive year, enforced a ban on girls' education beyond grade 6, resulting in millions of children dropping off school, which is deeply concerning. Education is the cornerstone of national development and revitalization. We call on the Afghan authorities to place national and people's interests first, take active measures to ensure girls' education, better guarantee women's equal rights to employment, healthcare, access to public services, and participation in social life, and present an image of openness, inclusiveness, and responsibility. The policy restricting female Afghan UN staff from accessing the UN office premises has been in place for several months, seriously affecting the normal functioning of UN agencies in Afghanistan. It should be lifted as soon as possible so that the international community can better assist Afghanistan in overcoming its difficulties. Fourth, a united international front against terrorism must be solidified. Terrorism is a common enemy of humanity, and counterterrorism is an international obligation that all countries must fulfill. Although the Afghan authorities have taken action in recent years against ISIL-Khorasan, this group, along with Al-Qaeda, the ETIM, TTP, BLA, and other terrorist groups, remains active in Afghanistan, posing a serious threat to the security of Afghanistan and the surrounding region. We urge the Afghan authorities to strengthen their resolve and intensify efforts in counterterrorism, resolutely eliminate all terrorist forces based in Afghanistan, including individuals and entities designated by the Security Council 1267 Committee, and enhance counterterrorism cooperation with the regional countries and international community to safeguard common security. President, since the escalation of border tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan, China, as a friendly neighbor to both countries, has actively engaged in mediation efforts to promote de-escalation and sustain dialogue between the two sides. In April, representatives of China, Pakistan, and Afghanistan held an informal meeting in Urumqi, Xinjiang, China, reaching important consensus on maintaining good neighborly relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, strengthening dialogue and consultation, and exploring comprehensive solutions. China stands ready to continue playing a constructive role and work with both Pakistan and Afghanistan to jointly maintain regional peace and tranquility. President, over the years, the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan has played an important role in coordinating international assistance and facilitating engagement and dialogue. China commends this and will continue to support UNAMA in fulfilling its mandate. The mandate of UNAMA is set to expire by mid-June. As the penholder of the African dossier, China will make every effort to promote consensus among Security Council members and support the smooth renewal of UNAMA's mandate in order to contribute positively to Afghanistan's development and stability and its early reintegration into the international community. China hopes all Council members will make constructive efforts to this end. I thank you, President.
I thank the delegation of China. I now give the floor to the delegation of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you, DSRSG Gagnon, OCHA Director Wasono, and Ms. Metra Mehran for their briefings this morning. Let me begin by expressing our deep appreciation to UNAMA for their work, including their latest report, which highlights the fragile and deteriorating situation facing the people of Afghanistan. Today, I will focus on three critical issues: respect for rights, the need for de-escalation and humanitarian access, and the importance of UNAMA and the UN-led multilateral process. First, we are deeply concerned by the continued erosion of the rights of women, girls, and religious minorities, as Ms. Mehran has clearly and starkly illustrated today. The Taliban's recent decrees further entrench gender inequality, limit access to justice, and formalize discriminatory practices that violate Afghanistan's international obligations. The United Kingdom strongly condemns these draconian and discriminatory measures and laws. We call on the Taliban to reverse these measures and to respect the fundamental freedoms of all Afghans in line with international law. Second, we reiterate our call for de-escalation and continued dialogue between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and for decisive action to be taken against any terrorist groups operating in and from Afghanistan. DSRSG Gagnon articulated clearly the many impacts of insecurity on the people of Afghanistan, including impeding humanitarian support. Colleagues, an estimated 22 million people across the country require humanitarian support, facing multiple vulnerabilities exacerbated by climate stresses. In this context, we reiterate the importance of the safe, rapid, and unimpeded delivery of humanitarian assistance, For our part, the UK has allocated over $200 million in essential assistance in the last fiscal year. The year prior, UK assistance reached at least 2.7 million people, including 1.7 million women and girls. We remain committed to ensuring women and girls make up at least half of those reached by UK aid, and we are working closely with partners to maintain women's participation in aid delivery and to safeguard access to assistance in spite of increasing tensions and restrictions. Finally, as the Council continues its deliberations on UNAMA's mandate, allow me to underscore our continued commitment to ensuring the UN's continued presence on the ground. The international community has been clear on the need for the Taliban to meet its obligations, and we call on them to engage constructively in the UN-led multilateral process toward our collective goal of a stable Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbours. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the delegation of France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. I would like to thank the acting special representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Georgette Gagnon, as well as Director of the Crisis Response Division, Ms. Adam Wosornu, and Ms. Metra Miran, founder of the Afghanistan Justice Archive. I thank them for their briefings, and I also welcome the presence of the representative of Afghanistan with us. President, Afghanistan has been living under the yoke of a deliberate policy of segregation imposed by the Taliban for nearly 5 years. France condemns the widespread violations of rights of women and girls and the challenges that result. Despite the repeated calls of the international community and the Afghan population, the Taliban continue their policy of systematic persecution, blinded by their violent ideology and with no regard for the future of generations of Afghan women and men. Denying half the population the ability to study, to work, to seek medical care, or even to speak in public spaces constitutes gender-based persecution. This policy is hampering the country's economic development. It is fueling violence and destabilizing the region. And the humanitarian situation, which is already critical, has been made worse by the return of millions of refugees. And not only has the Taliban done nothing to prepare for this, but they have made catastrophic choices that have plunged the country into misery and destitution. France will not abandon the Afghan people. We will work with our European partners to deliver humanitarian assistance in accordance with the principle of aid delivered by and for women. We expect the Taliban to provide free access for humanitarian assistance and ensure full respect for the fundamental principles of the equitable distribution of aid in accordance with need, beginning with women and children. Second point, the presence of terrorist groups in Afghanistan, particularly Islamic State Khorasan Province, Al-Qaeda, and the TTP, is a matter of international security. France calls on the Taliban to clarify their stance towards these groups and to undertake concrete, sustained efforts to combat all terrorist groups operating in their country. Third, in this context, UNAMA's presence on the ground remains indispensable. What Afghanistan is going through currently is not a return to peace and stability. It is terror that is creating a tragedy of immeasurable consequences for the country, its people, and the region. France therefore supports the renewal of UNAMA's mandate, which we expect the Council to adopt in the coming days. The mission plays a vital role in facilitating inclusive political dialogue with all Afghan stakeholders, including women and minorities. We expect that UNAMA will work towards ensuring that Afghanistan upholds its international obligations as it has been doing consistently for years. France remains deeply concerned about the situation of Afghan female employees in Afghanistan, employees of the UN who have been barred from their workplaces for nearly a year. The Council has not remained silent in the face of Taliban's systematic obstruction of the mandate that we have entrusted to UNAMA. Fourth, The Doha process has not delivered the progress that was hoped for. There has been no meaningful advancement in the implementation of the requirements set out by this Council in Resolution 2593 and subsequent resolutions. The Taliban have committed increasing violations of international law and have refused to engage in good faith with the political process initiated 3 years ago, despite the openings extended by the international community. France advocates a coherent and principled approach by the international community. Our position is unchanged. Taliban's compliance with their international obligations is the prerequisite for any progress towards Afghanistan's reintegration into the international community. The dialogue process must be inclusive, must lead to genuine human rights commitments, and must benefit the entire Afghan population. In the absence of such efforts, no progress is possible. To conclude, President, I wish to reiterate France's support for UNAMA, as well as for all UN agencies and their partners who are doing remarkable work on the ground despite the increasingly difficult conditions created by the Taliban. The must show our solidarity with the people of Afghanistan, whom we will not abandon. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of France. I now give the floor to the delegation of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель.
Mr. President, Russia has consistently supported UNAMA's efforts in the discharge of its mandate. We are convinced that the mission must fulfill its functions in full, including those related to facilitating the Afghan settlement process and improving the socioeconomic situation in the country. Promoting confidence building and fostering pragmatic engagement between the authorities and the international community remains imperative. Indeed, it is the key to maintaining a UN presence on the ground. We have taken note of the Secretary General's report on the situation in the country, and we wish to make the following observations. In the nearly 5 years since the irresponsible withdrawal of foreign troops, Afghanistan has traveled a long road, and it has endured. The Taliban's focus on developing multifaceted regional cooperation with a view to building an independent and self-reliant state has proven justified. Despite the continued stranglehold of sanctions, painstaking work is underway to address the problems that have accumulated during years of occupation. However, this process requires both effort and time. It is clear that a country that has spent 20 years dependent on international assistance requires our collective and depoliticized support. Mr. President, Russia consistently advocates for the development of a realistic and comprehensive approach to Afghanistan, one that is grounded in objective analysis and a balanced assessment of the situation on the ground. This is an imperative for which there is no alternative, whether now or in the future. The key elements of this approach remain unchanged. Genuine constructive engagement by the international community on the Afghan issue, full consideration of the needs of the Afghan people themselves, and a trust-based dialogue with the authorities on all outstanding issues. The success of such a dialogue depends entirely on the willingness of both sides to engage while fully renouncing any pressure or ultimatums. Such a comprehensive approach is supported by all regional actors without exception, particularly the participants of the Moscow format and its regional quartet, as well as the CSTO and the SCO, including the CSTO Working Group in Afghanistan and the SCO Afghanistan Contact Group. A similar, generally pragmatic intention is also behind the mosaic approach put forward by UNAMA itself. At its core is engagement with the Taliban on all key issues, including diplomatic representations, the lifting of sanctions, and unfreezing of assets, as well as combating terrorist and drug-related threats and protecting human rights. Addressing these issues in a timely manner without preconditions is the most direct path to Afghanistan's international reintegration. Attempts to act selectively and with bias, focusing only on those issues that Western donors are prepared to discuss, will not produce the desired outcome and will only further delay prospects for a resolution of the Afghan issue. Against this backdrop, it is regrettable that some Western donors have failed to draw conclusions from their past mistakes and continue to repeat them. They persist in pushing the United Nations and UNAMA in particular towards an approach that is based on pressure and ultimatums and is bound to fail. It is long past time to recognize that such actions are only adding fuel to the fire, jeopardizing the future of the mission as a whole, a future that is unfortunately currently not fully clear given the reservations of certain council members. It is unlikely that the authorities of Afghanistan themselves will be interested in maintaining a UN presence merely to serve the interests of the intervening forces that were expelled in August 2021. We once again appeal to the Secretary General, from whom all parties expect the prompt appointment of a new head of UNAMA. This process has been unjustifiably delayed. We also trust that in identifying the most suitable candidate, the SG will consult not only with members of the Security Council, but will also take into account the views of the Afghan authorities themselves, because the effective implementation of the mission's mandate will ultimately depend on their consent. President, we are concerned by the ongoing tensions between the friendly states of Afghanistan and Pakistan against the backdrop of terrorist activity by Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan. We are convinced that there is an imperative need to bring the situation back onto a political and diplomatic track, and we stand ready to provide assistance and support to our friends and look forward to the resumption of mutually beneficial cooperation between them, including on the issue of counterterrorism. We're also concerned by the continuing presence of ISIL-Khorasan in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the efforts undertaken by the authorities to combat terrorist threats are insufficient to date. The group is consolidating its capabilities, including through the recruitment of new members and external financial support. Terrorists are exploiting every opportunity to destabilize the situation in the country and the region as a whole, including the presence of militants from TTP and the East Turkestan Islamic movement in Afghanistan. It is clear that ISIL has not abandoned its plans to establish a Caliphate 2.0. We are closely monitoring the terrorist activity of foreign fighters who have gained combat experience in Syria and Iraq. The situation is further aggravated by the unclear status of the weapons abandoned by NATO forces. The drug problem is closely linked to the issue of terrorism. We note the Taliban's success in combating the cultivation of the opium poppy. At the same time, we also call on them to step up their efforts to counter another, even more dangerous threat, synthetic drugs, the production of which is currently proceeding at full pace. Eradicating the drug threat in full will require broad regional and international cooperation, including through the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. The Russian Federation attaches great importance to the socioeconomic situation in the country. We consistently note the selfless efforts of humanitarian agencies and their staff who continue to provide assistance to Afghans in need under difficult conditions, including chronic underfunding. We call on UNAMA to intensify efforts aimed at unfreezing assets and promoting development in Afghanistan. We also call on Western donors who speak out loudly about the need to protect the rights of women and girls. If you are sincere in your wish to help, then help create the conditions necessary for them to live their lives in a stable and developed country. This is particularly important in light of the potential wave of Afghan refugees forced to return from neighboring Iran amid the armed aggression against it by Israel and the United States. Russia provides ongoing assistance to the Afghan people. We are prepared to expand our partnerships with that country across all areas, including regional security issues. We have a strong interest in strengthening Afghanistan's trade and economic capacity and dialogue with local business representatives through the specialized forums being organized by our country. We are closely monitoring developments regarding the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms in Afghanistan, including the inalienable rights to education and work for all Afghans, regardless, and I stress, of their ethnic, religious, or gender identity. We are tracking progress towards the formation of a genuinely inclusive government representing all of the country's ethnic and political groups. We expect to see progress on both these tracks. Madam President, the Russian Federation sincerely supports the aspirations of the Afghan people to live in a peaceful and prosperous country free from terrorism and narcotics. The situation in Afghanistan will determine the stability of the region as a whole. We once again call on the United Nations to ensure our engagement with those Afghans who directly represent the de facto authorities and who are genuinely responsible for developments in the country. Only in this way can existing problems be resolved and Afghanistan truly reintegrated into the international community. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, and my own country, Liberia. We thank the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General and officer in charge of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan for her comprehensive briefing. We also take note of the vital updates provided by OCHA and insights from our civil society briefer. The A3 remains deeply concerned by the mounting social, economic, and security pressures facing Afghanistan. The Afghan people continue to endure the severe consequences of prolonged isolation, economic fragility, and deteriorating humanitarian conditions, now compounded by volatile regional dynamics. The A3 reaffirms the vital importance of sustained, flexible, and principled international engagement in support of the Afghan people. In this regard, the A3 would like to highlight the following core points. First, the A3 reiterates its unwavering support for the indispensable work of UNAMA. We underline the critical role played by the mission as a central platform for international engagement, the coordination of basic human needs, and the facilitation of pathways toward sustainable reintegration and stability. With this in mind, we emphasize that UNAMA must be afforded the necessary conditions to effectively carry out its mandate at both the national and subnational levels, including through safe, non-discriminatory, and unhindered access for all United Nations personnel and humanitarian partners. Second, the A3 expresses grave alarm over the sharply deteriorating humanitarian and economic landscape. The cumulative shocks of severe flash floods affecting 31 provinces, structural underdevelopment, and an underfunded 2026 humanitarian needs and response plan, which remains critically financed at only 14%, demand immediate international redress. Furthermore, we observe with deep concern that prolonged border closures and regional instability have severely disrupted trade corridors, driving a 10% surge in fuel prices and accelerating food inflation. With 21.9 million people in urgent need of assistance and over 540,000 returnees, placing an immense strain on local absorption capacities, as we heard from the briefers. The international community, therefore, must act swiftly to close these funding gaps and prevent absolute economic collapse in Afghanistan. Third, the A3 recognizes that the full, meaningful, and non-discriminatory participation of women and girls is a cornerstone for Afghanistan's successful reintegration into the international community. We note with profound regret that the ban on girls' education beyond grade 6 has entered its 5th consecutive year. We are further deeply concerned by the institutionalization of gender-based hierarchy through the recent decree number 12 on the criminal rules of courts, which systematically undermines the independent legal status of women, expands discretionary penalties, and curtails access to justice. The A3 also reiterates its condemnation of the ongoing restrictions preventing United Nations national female personnel from accessing UN premises, and a directive that explicitly contravenes the Charter of the United Nations. We therefore call on the de facto authorities to immediately lift the discriminatory restrictions on women and girls. Fourth, the A3 is deeply troubled by the dramatic 57.7% increase in safety and security incidents characterized by severe cross-border hostilities. The intense escalation of military operations, airstrikes, and drone activities along the border has caused hundreds of civilian casualties, widespread displacement, and the destruction of critical health infrastructure. We strongly urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint, fulfill their obligations under international humanitarian law regarding the protection of civilians, and utilize regional mediation channels to establish a durable ceasefire and secure predictable border crossings. Concurrently, we reaffirm that Afghan territory must not be utilized as a launchpad for transnational terrorist organizations, including ISIL-K and Al-Qaeda. We underscore the vital role of the Security Council 1988 Sanctions Committee in addressing these enduring threats to international peace and security. Fifth, the A3 firmly maintains that there can be no security without development, and correspondingly, no development without security across Afghanistan. We are entirely convinced that lasting peace flourishes alongside economic growth, just as progress thrives in an environment of safety and stability. By resolutely integrating robust security measures with the concurrent delivery of economic opportunities, alternative livelihoods for former poppy farmers, and vital state services, we actively unlock the full potential of Afghan communities. Ultimately, nationwide resilience is achieved when we champion security and development as two inseparable, mutually reinforcing pillars of a prosperous future for the Afghan people. To conclude, Madam President, the A3 reiterates its unwavering commitment to the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity of Afghanistan. We echo the Secretary General's call for structured, pragmatic engagement through the Doha process as envisioned by Security Council Resolution 2721. Only through a well-coordinated, principled approach across the political, humanitarian, and development nexus can we truly, meaningfully alleviate the plight of the Afghan population. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Liberia for that statement. I now give the floor to Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. And I would also like to thank Officer in Charge and Deputy SRSG UNAMA, Georgette Gagnon, and Director Wasonu for their briefings. And we also take note of the contribution by Ms. Mehran. We take note of the Secretary General's report. Madam President, it's been nearly half a decade since the Taliban takeover. And it was hoped this will end bloodshed and Afghanistan will be at peace with itself and its neighbors. And to help our Afghan brethren, Pakistan took numerous steps to support Afghanistan, including humanitarian relief efforts, political engagement, providing incentives to boost bilateral trade, offering transit concessions, issuing student and medical visas, conducting high-level visits to Kabul, and participating in various regional cooperation initiatives to help Afghanistan succeed in its quest to find its rightful place in the international community. With the end of civil war, it was anticipated that the Taliban would take positive steps to transform into a responsible governing authority by adhering to their international obligations and commitments, and that they will lead Afghanistan into an era of stability and progress, provide the long-awaited relief to all Afghans, and live in harmony with immediate neighbors. Madam President, for decades, terrorism has been a major problem in Afghanistan, with implications not just for Afghanistan, but the immediate neighborhood and beyond. Afghanistan has a history of being a safe haven for terrorist groups, including those used as proxies by our adversaries to target Pakistan and other countries. It was our expectation that the Taliban would take concrete and verifiable actions against terrorist groups such as the TTP, PLA and its Majid Brigade, ISIL-K, ETIM, and their affiliates that are operating with impunity on Afghan soil. Regrettably, they have failed to undertake action, showing complete disregard for the legitimate security concerns of Pakistan and other countries. Besides independent analysis that is present, the reports of the Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team that clearly outline the terrorism problem in Afghanistan and the on-ground realities and recent exponential rise in terrorist attacks in Pakistan. These are glaring reminders of the precarious situation faced today and the threats posed to international peace and security. As a direct result of the freedom with which these terrorist groups operate in Afghanistan, Pakistan has borne the brunt of their attacks, as well as Taliban's growing nexus with these terrorist groups. And once again, a significant number of Afghans are found to be involved in terrorism inside Pakistan. These terrorist groups have access to advanced weapons and sophisticated equipment, including drones also recently. And much of this can be traced back to the multi-billion-dollar worth of arms and ammunition left behind by foreign forces, which was meant for use by the previous Afghan national government. During our counter-terrorism operations, there have been more than 290 cases of seizures of such weapons, which are used for terrorism and suicide bombings in the western parts of Pakistan, and which have exacted a heavy toll of human life and material losses. In 2025 alone, Pakistan suffered more than 5,300 terrorist incidents and lost more than 1,200 lives to terrorism emanating from Afghanistan. And last month, a vehicle-borne IED attack by the TTP on a police post in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa on 9th May martyred 15 police officers. And our investigations revealed that the attack was planned by terrorists in Afghanistan. It is deplorable that the Taliban have reverted back to their old tactics of providing safe havens to terrorist groups and chosen the perilous path of complicity backed by an outside actor, the historic spoiler and instigator of chaos, and that has moved fast as an opportunist to wage a proxy war against Pakistan. Let me make it clear. Pakistan will defend itself against whosoever attempts to harm our sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national security. Madam President, Pakistan has always expressed openness for dialogue, and numerous diplomatic efforts were made to counsel the Taliban. And we thank friendly countries for their genuine mediation efforts, particularly Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and most recently China, to find amicable solutions. Yet the Taliban's continued intransigence and even refusal to publicly denounce and condemn terrorist groups such as the TTP and BLA is deeply disturbing. It is evidence enough of their complicity and active support for these groups. Pakistan will not sit idle while suffering from terrorist acts. We will respond in self-defense as and when needed, and always in conformity with international law, including IHL. Madam President, the most recent report of the Secretary General seems to largely externalize the responsibility for Afghanistan's multifaceted challenges. The fatalities of terrorists and their supporters as a result of counterterrorism operations are mentioned within the ambit of civilian casualties, posing serious questions on the credibility of UNAMA's reporting from Afghanistan and the nature of their engagement with the Taliban. UNAMA is swift in reporting incidents of cross-border actions and casualties, but fails to provide the overall context, which is the grave terrorist threat emanating from Afghanistan and its cross-border impact directed at Pakistan that is harming Pakistan and killing innocent Pakistanis. Neither the Secretary General's report provides information on the destabilizing accumulation of small arms and light weapons inside Afghanistan, nor does it adequately shed light on Afghanistan's illicit economy with its complex web of money laundering and terror financing networks, including Hundi and Hawala networks. Instead, the report resorts to shift the blame on external dynamics with little regard for the Taliban's own policies that have brought Afghanistan to the brink of disaster. We must not lose sight of the fact that it is Taliban's reckless style of governance and flawed ideologies of extremism, suppression, and radicalization that have brought upon Afghanistan the calamities it faces today. The humanitarian needs and response plan for 2026, as we are told, is underfunded at 14%, which again a direct result of Taliban's unwillingness to prioritize the welfare of Afghans over their own interests and authoritarian control. Well, President, several references have been made to the closure of border. Let me clarify that the closure of border between Pakistan and Afghanistan does not, from Pakistan's perspective, affect the movement of humanitarian supplies. Pakistan has been processing and facilitating the passage of humanitarian goods and material. However, the Afghan Taliban regime refuses to let them pass and keeps the border closed on its side, even to receive such life-saving cargoes, and which obviously is to the detriment of the Afghan people. The worsening situation of human rights is also aligned with Taliban's failings and deceitful narrative to meet the demands of the international community. Women and girls are denied their fundamental human rights and dignity, with discriminatory and abusive practices, a clear violation of their international obligations as well as of Islamic laws, traditions, and tenets of the Muslim faith. The Afghan people are being held hostage to these inhumane restrictions, oppression, and selfish behavior. Madam President, for over 4 decades, Pakistan welcomed millions of Afghan refugees despite limitations and insufficient international support, dealing with huge caseloads of illegal Afghans, including without documentation, posing a serious threat to our security. But these were never meant to be indefinite stays. We call upon the Secretary General to clearly outline the status of third country resettlement cases of Afghans in a transparent manner. Cases that are pending for years, despite being a tiny fraction of what Pakistan had to deal with in the face of national security threats, and that no country would tolerate. While we provide all possible facilitation, the international community must step up and shoulder its responsibility. Shifting the blame of Afghanistan's woes to the inflow of Afghan returnees will not solve the problem. Madam President, we look forward to the next steps of the UN-led Doha process and action plan for its mosaic approach to address Afghanistan's multifaceted challenges comprehensively, with well-defined objectives and a realistic roadmap as the only viable path for normalization. Pakistan and Afghanistan are bound by geography, deep-rooted ties, civilizational links dating back 2 centuries, fraternal bonds of faith, culture, and ethnicity, no country has suffered more from the consequences of conflict and instability in Afghanistan than Pakistan. So we understand, and we also know that no country stands to benefit more from peace, prosperity, and stability in Afghanistan than Pakistan. Pakistan's demand from the Taliban is simple and clear: verifiable and non-reversible action against terrorists. Regrettably, this demand remains unmet. The window for course correction is narrowing, but is still open. We hope the Taliban realize this in earnest and cooperate with the international community for long-term peace and development of Afghanistan, and above all, in the best interest of all Afghans. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also thank Deputy SRSG, Ms. Georgette Gagnon, and OCHA Director, Ms. Adam Worsening, for their informative briefings, as well as Ms. Mitra Mehran for her compelling contribution. We welcome the Secretary General's report, so allow me to make 3 points. First, Latvia expresses its deep concern over the severe restrictions on humanitarian access and the growing security risks faced by the humanitarian personnel. The humanitarian crisis, already affecting 45% of Afghanistan's population in need of assistance, has been further exacerbated by the Taliban's own actions and policies. According to OCHA, and we heard, around 70% of the 48 reported incidents disrupting humanitarian operations in April were linked to Taliban interference. Restriction on women humanitarian workers and the ongoing ban preventing Afghan female staff from accessing UN premises are unacceptable and continue to be enforced despite the Council's consistent condemnation. Hostilities, large-scale returns of Afghan refugees, and climate shocks have created a multi-layered emergency, but humanitarian actors cannot respond effectively without safe operating space and predictable movement pathways. Prolonged Afghanistan-Pakistan border closures by the Taliban further obstruct aid delivery. Unimpeded access must be ensured without delay. And we urge the Taliban to lift all restrictions obstructing humanitarian work, ensure the full participation of women humanitarian staff, and guarantee unfettered access for aid organizations across Afghanistan. Second, the Taliban's restrictions continue to deprive Afghans, especially women and girls, of their most basic human rights. These measures contradict the universal principles of dignity, justice and education, as well as international human rights law. On March 26, Afghanistan entered its 5th consecutive year in which girls are barred from schooling beyond grade 6. A policy that has contributed to 2.6 million children being out of the classroom. It is a direct assault on girls' rights and their ability to shape their own lives. Keeping women and girls from schools, workplaces, and access to health care is also a permanent loss for Afghanistan's future development. While girls remain shut out of school, the Taliban have issued yet another decree, this time effectively lending legitimacy to child marriage. It sets no minimum age for marriage and includes provisions on separation for girls who reach puberty and are married, implying that this practice is permissible. Such a decree constitutes a blatant violation of children's rights and undermines every international norm designed to protect them. These decisions weaken and isolate Afghanistan, denying its people, particularly women and girls, of the future they deserve. And we call on the Taliban to reverse these policies immediately. Third, the UN-led Doha process remains the key forum for shaping a coordinated international approach to Afghanistan. Dialogue with Afghan civil society, including women's organizations, is vital, especially at a time when the civic space in Afghanistan continues to shrink. And we commend UNAMA's outreach efforts, including engagement with civil society, women activists, tribal elders, journalists, and other groups, as well as meetings with youth across 10 provinces conducted this year. And in this regard, the timely appointment of a new SRSG for Afghanistan to lead the political process is crucial. Among the many issues the Taliban must urgently address is counterterrorism. Afghanistan cannot become a safe operating space for actors that threaten regional stability and security, and the Taliban must demonstrate through real, verifiable actions that they are preventing such activity. As hostilities between the Taliban and Pakistan persist, we call on continued dialogue, de-escalation, and protection of civilians to remain central in all actions taken. Madam President, the case of Afghanistan demonstrates what women, peace and security agenda has long affirmed. There can be no peace, no stability, and no sustainable progress where women are denied their rights and excluded from society. Latvia will continue to speak up for Afghan women and girls and will unwaveringly support the important role of UNAMA with a strong mandate. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia. And I now give the floor to the representative of Panama. Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. I thank the Deputy Special Representative, Ms. Georgette Gagnon. I thank Ms. Edim Wasonu, Director of the Crisis Response Division in OCHA, and Ms. Mitra Mehran, founder of the Afghanistan Justice Archive. She was representing civil society. I thank them all for their invaluable briefings. Moreover, we wish to hail the work that UNAMA continues to perform in extraordinarily complex circumstances. In a context marked by a human rights situation and a security situation which are worsening in tandem, UNAMA's presence in the country remains of vital importance. President, the human rights situation in Afghanistan continues to be a source of grave concern. We are particularly concerned by the continued enforcement of the ban on Afghan women working for the United Nations on accessing the organization's facilities. We reiterate our appeal for those measures to be lifted immediately. We are also concerned by the fact that the beginning of a new school year now marks the 5th consecutive year in which millions of Afghan girls have continued to be denied access to secondary education. This situation stands as a grave violation of rights and compromises the economic, social and institutional future of the country. Afghanistan cannot aspire to stability and sustainable development while a significant portion of its population is deprived of any opportunity to fully contribute to national life. Panama condemns the recent findings in connection with the new legal and penal framework introduced by the Taliban. Against this backdrop, Panama wishes to recall that on the 9th of March, it led, together with more than 40 member states, a joint statement to express our grave concern at the worsening human rights situation in Afghanistan, and in particular our concern at the recent adoption of a new legal instrument on the Criminal Procedure Code. That was Decree number 12. That decree institutionalizes the systematic discrimination against women and girls. We also firmly condemn Decree number 18 that was issued in May 2026 by the de facto Justice Ministry. That decree establishes provisions which in practice legitimize child marriage and normalize a practice which constitutes a grave violation of human rights. This decree forms part of a sustained pattern of exclusion and the curtailment of rights, which for almost 5 years has progressively marginalized women and girls and kept them out of education, employment, justice and public life. President, the security situation has worsened significantly during the reporting period. Clashes between Afghanistan and neighboring countries have produced hundreds of civilian victims, as well as mass displacement and damage to critical infrastructure. Panama appeals to all parties to exercise utmost restraint, to as well fully comply with international law and to prioritize the protection of civilians. Moreover, we reiterate our concern at the persistent threat posed by the terrorist groups that are operating in Afghanistan, including ISIL-K. Moreover, we underscore the importance of ensuring that Afghan territory is not used to threaten or attack other states. The Afghan people is already facing colossal humanitarian, economic and social challenges. Any additional escalation would only further worsen the people's suffering. Elsewhere, the humanitarian and economic situation continue to be incredibly fragile. The combination of a downturn in international assistance, disrupted trade, mass returns, inflation, and the results of regional tensions are placing new pressures on the shoulders of Afghan communities. President, Panama supports the renewal of UNAMA's mandate and its full implementation. The mandate must preserve a robust approach in the field of human rights and remain robust when it comes to women, peace and security. Today, more than ever before, Afghanistan requires a UN presence which is capable of supporting the country, of keeping channels for dialogue open, of promoting respect for human rights, and of promoting the full, equal and meaningful participation of women to coordinate an international response to the manifold challenges facing the country. It is our duty to step up our collective efforts to make progress towards an Afghanistan at peace with itself, an Afghanistan which is fully integrated into the international community, and an Afghanistan in which all citizens can fully exercise their rights and harness their potential. Thank you. I thank the representative of Panama, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Deputy SRSG Gagnon, Director Worsening, and Ms. Mehran for your briefings. The United States' top priority in Afghanistan remains the protection of our citizens and the safeguarding of our national security. The Taliban's abhorrent practice of hostage diplomacy continues, and we call on all members of this Security Council to condemn the Taliban for their unjust detention of United States citizens. We also call on all Council members to echo our condemnation of the Taliban's sheltering of terrorist groups and their refusal to implement counterterrorism commitments. Furthermore, the Taliban continue to inflict constant hardship and suffering on the people of Afghanistan. Their oppressive policies have exacerbated already severe humanitarian and economic crises. By limiting access to basic services, obstructing the delivery of international humanitarian aid, and committing serious human rights abuses, most notably the systemic and unconscionable restrictions on the exercise of women's rights, the Taliban demonstrate their blatant disregard for the well-being of the Afghan people. As today's briefers have so clearly described, the Taliban continue their appalling and frankly horrific treatment of the women and girls of Afghanistan. The Taliban's actions also impede the functioning of UNAMA, including by preventing Afghan female staff from entering UN premises across the country. The Taliban's intransigence forces us to ask hard questions about the value of continued international engagement and resources. UNAMA remains the most expensive special political mission in the United Nations system, warranting close scrutiny. All missions, including UNAMA, must provide value for money and must adapt to conditions on the ground. The United States appreciates Council members using the upcoming mandate renewal to improve UNAMA's effectiveness, and we look forward to the adoption of a streamlined resolution. On the diplomatic front, the UN-led comprehensive approach provides a potential path forward, and the Taliban must engage seriously. Any step towards normalization depends entirely on the Taliban's own actions, including progress on the issues raised through this process. Tangible progress in the Doha process is not optional. It is urgent. The international community cannot indefinitely sustain a framework for engagement while the Taliban detain innocent Americans, ignore the needs of the Afghan people, deny Afghan women their basic rights, and fail to meet their counterterrorism commitments. Equally urgent is the appointment of a qualified, empowered special representative of the Secretary General. The absence of a permanent SRSG weakens the international community's ability to coordinate, advocate, and hold the Taliban accountable. That vacancy must be filled without further delay. Colleagues, this Council must continue to demand responsible actions from the Taliban. Actions, not words, are a fundamental requirement for international peace and security, and the people of Afghanistan deserve no less. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States, and I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
President. Let me also thank Deputy SRSG Gagnon, Director Wosono, and Ms. Mehran for their valuable briefings. Nearly 5 years after the Taliban's violent seizure of power, Afghanistan remains trapped in a cycle of systemic repression and humanitarian suffering, with no meaningful steps taken to reverse course. Allow me to make 3 points. First, we are deeply appalled by the Taliban's widespread dismantling of fundamental rights and freedoms in Afghanistan. The scale and severity of these restrictions, particularly against women and girls, are unparalleled. These are not isolated acts, rather a deliberate pattern of institutionalized gender-based discrimination and exclusion, as outlined so powerful by Ms. Mehran. Girls remain barred from secondary and higher education. Women are excluded from most employment. Their movement is restricted. Their access to justice is curtailed. And their participation in public life has been eliminated. Decree number 18 represents another deeply troubling step on this trajectory. It effectively legitimizes marriage for children as young as 9 and allows a girl's silence to be interpreted as consent. Let us be clear, silence is not consent, and a 9-year-old girl is not an adult. Denmark strongly condemns Decree 18 and all measures that discriminate against women and girls or restrict the fundamental rights and freedoms of the Afghan people. The Taliban must immediately bring their laws, policies, and practices into full compliance with Afghanistan's international human rights obligations. We also call for strengthened international effort to hold the Taliban accountable for violations of international law, including through UN mechanisms, the ICC, and strengthened support to the independent international mechanism for Afghanistan. Second, Madam President, the humanitarian situation is becoming increasingly desperate, with more than 21 million Afghans in need of humanitarian assistance and widespread acute food insecurity and malnutrition. Needs are further driven by displacement, climate shocks, including water scarcity, economic hardship, and regional instability, including cross-border hostilities. At the same time, humanitarian agencies are stretched to the limit, operating under severe funding shortages and increasingly constrained conditions, as Madam Wosono pointed to. Denmark also remains deeply concerned by the continued ban on Afghan female UN personnel. UN personnel serve on behalf of all of us. Restrictions on their work undermine not only the delivery of assistance, but also the implementation of this Council's mandate. We once again demand that the Taliban ensure full, safe, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian access across Afghanistan and remove all restrictions on female personnel. Third, Madam President, Afghanistan must never again become a safe haven for terrorism, and its territory must not be used to threaten or attack any country. We call on the Taliban to take sustained action against all terrorist groups operating in or from Afghanistan, including ISIL-K and TTP, in line with this Council's resolutions. The recent hostilities between Afghanistan and Pakistan further underscore the ongoing regional tensions. We call for restraint and urge continued efforts to reduce tensions, including China's facilitation of dialogue, to support de-escalation and a durable ceasefire. All parties must comply with international law and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure in line with international humanitarian law. In closing, let me extend Denmark's strong appreciation to UNAMA and all UN personnel working under incredibly difficult circumstances across Afghanistan. Ahead of UNAMA's mandate renewal, Denmark supports a strong UN presence on the ground with a clear focus on human rights, humanitarian coordination, and good officers. The Women, Peace and Security agenda must remain central to all UN engagement on Afghanistan, with women's rights, participation and protection fully integrated across political, humanitarian and governance efforts, including in the Doha process. To this end, we call for the appointment of a UN Special Envoy, and we reiterate the need to appoint a special representative without delay. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark. I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
President, I would like to thank Deputy Special Representative Georgette Gagnon, OCHA Director Adem Gossorno, and Ms. Metra Mehran for their remarks, and welcome the presence of Afghanistan in the meeting. Madam President, while Afghanistan is experiencing a period of elusive calm, deep-seated political, economic, social and environmental challenges reveal the fragile nature of this reality. The human rights situation continues to deteriorate, particularly for women and girls, as restrictive measures are tightened instead of being reversed. I would like to make the following 3 points today. First, restrictions on the human rights and fundamental freedoms of women and girls have reached, as we have heard today by our briefers, unprecedented levels, preventing their effective participation in public and private life. For the 5th consecutive year, girls remain banned from secondary and higher education. Since last September, women UN personnel have been barred from their offices, severely impacting the delivery of humanitarian assistance and health care to women across the country. This systemic regression is further exacerbated by the recent decree on criminal rules of courts that legitimizes violence against women and child marriage. Moreover, the ongoing erosion of the freedom of expression and media freedom, as evidenced by the suspension of media outlets and organizations, is deeply alarming. We urge the Taliban to immediately lift these restrictions and oppressive measures, restore full access to education for girls, and permit Afghan women, UN personnel to return to their workplaces. We call upon the Taliban to honor Afghanistan's international commitments, particularly the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women, and we affirm our support for all means of accountability. Additionally, we reiterate the critical importance of free, independent, and pluralistic media. Second, we reaffirm our principled position that the territory of Afghanistan must never serve as a safe haven for terrorism, and we call on the Taliban to take all necessary measures to combat terrorist activities, including those targeting neighboring countries. We remain concerned by the cross-border clashes between the Taliban and the Pakistani security forces over the past months that resulted in numerous civilian casualties, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, and disruptions to the delivery of humanitarian assistance due to border closures. We welcome the reduction in tension over recent weeks and all mediation efforts by regional countries, most recently by China. We reiterate our call for de-escalation, a ceasefire, and a peaceful resolution of disputes through dialogue and diplomacy. We underline the importance of adherence to international law, including international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians. The unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance through secure and predictable border crossings is essential, especially as Afghanistan grapples with unprecedented levels of food insecurity and child malnutrition, extreme environmental conditions, and an influx of returnees. Third, Greece reiterates its full support for UNAMA and its indispensable role in facilitating political dialogue in Afghanistan, coordinating the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and monitoring the human rights situation. We therefore support the upcoming renewal of UNAMA's mandate in its entirety and call for its swift conclusion. In parallel, we urge the Taliban to establish the long-awaited mechanism for engagement with UNAMA's comprehensive approach. The Doha process remains an important framework for the reintegration of Afghanistan into the international community, provided that the Taliban abide by their international obligations regarding human rights, inclusive governance, and counterterrorism. Madam President, the Afghan people cannot afford continued isolation from the international community. The time has come for the Taliban to recognize this reality and engage meaningfully with UNAMA and relevant national and international stakeholders. I thank you.
Many thanks indeed to the representative of Greece. I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Madam President, at the outset, I would like to thank Ms. Georgette Gagnon, officer in charge of the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, and Ms. Edem Wazorno, representative of the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, for their comprehensive briefings and for the overview they provided of the latest developments in Afghanistan and the challenges the country is facing. The Kingdom of Bahrain values the efforts of UNAMA and its staff in implementing the mission's mandate despite the complex political, security, and humanitarian challenges. I also extend my thanks to Ms. Mitra Mehran for her valuable briefing. Madam President, the Kingdom of Bahrain stresses the importance of the role that UNAMA continues to play in supporting international efforts in Afghanistan, including coordinating assistance, maintaining channels of dialogue, and monitoring political, human rights, and security developments throughout the country. The importance of this role is increasing in light of continuing social, economic, and security pressures, as indicated in the latest report of the Secretary General. These pressures are attributed to the decline in assistance, the return of large numbers of Afghans from neighboring countries, the border and regional tensions, in addition to the impact of disruptions in trade and supply chains on the humanitarian and economic situation in Afghanistan. In this context, the Kingdom of Bahrain would like to emphasize three main points. First, the Kingdom expresses its concern over the continued restrictions affecting women and girls in Afghanistan, particularly in the areas of education, employment, and participation in public life. The Afghan society is being deprived of half of its capacity, the capacity necessary to achieve stability, recovery, and development. The ban on girls' education beyond the 6th grade has entered its 5th year, while the restrictions imposed on Afghan female employees working for UNAMA continue to prevent them from accessing their workplaces. The Kingdom calls for addressing and lifting these restrictions. we call for granting women and girls their fundamental rights, including education, employment, and safe and meaningful participation in public life. Second, on the humanitarian and economic fronts, conditions in Afghanistan remain alarming. The latest SG report indicates that more than 21 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, and the 2026 Humanitarian Response Plan continues to suffer from a significant funding gap. These pressures are increasing with the continued return of large numbers of Afghans, which creates a strain on basic services. In this context, it is important to ensure that the humanitarian response take into account the actual needs of the Afghan people and to guarantee that assistance reaches those in need without discrimination. This would prevent a further deterioration of living conditions and would contribute to forging a path towards recovery and stability. Third, it is important to continue the Doha process, allowing the UN to convene meetings of special envoys on Afghanistan with the support of the sisterly state of Qatar, as this is a structured multilateral framework supporting international engagement on Afghanistan. This contributes to addressing priority issues and achieving tangible and practical results that serve the Afghan people. We further emphasize the importance of building upon the work of working groups established within this process, particularly in practical areas such as combating narcotics and supporting the private sector to strengthen the path towards recovery and stability. The stability of Afghanistan is linked to addressing cross-border terrorist threats and ensuring that its territory is not used as a safe haven or a launching pad for any terrorist groups threatening the security of any state. The Kingdom of Bahrain therefore condemns all terrorist attacks, including the terrorist attack carried out by TTP, targeting a police checkpoint in the Banu area on the 9th of May 2026. We firmly stand in solidarity with the Islamic Republic of Pakistan in confronting extremism and terrorism, and we support its security and stability. We reiterate our absolute rejection of all forms of violence and terrorism aimed at undermining security and stability and terrorizing innocent people. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain renews its support for UNAMA and for international efforts aimed at achieving security, stability, and prosperity in Afghanistan to serve the Afghan people and to preserve regional and international peace and stability. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Colombia. I thank Ms. Georgette Gagnon, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary-General for Afghanistan and Officer in Charge of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. I thank Ms. Idem Wasonu, Director of the Crisis Response Division in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, and I thank Ms. Mitra Mehran. I thank all briefers for their briefings. Moreover, I welcome the delegations here with us today. My delegation takes note with concern of the most recent report on the situation in Afghanistan. It continues to make it patently clear that there is a complex landscape on the ground and that there is a need to continue working for the well-being of all of the Afghan people. Colombia reiterates its condemnation of human rights violations. Particularly, we repudiate gender-based discrimination. It is alarming to note that Afghan women and girls continue to be severely affected by restrictions placed on all aspects of their lives, including the ban on their education, that is, education beyond the 6th grade. These measures make Afghan women and girls more vulnerable to all types of violence, including sexual violence and gender-based violence. My country reiterates its appeal for the Taliban to revoke without delay all policies and practices which curtail the rights of women and girls. It is of the utmost importance to guarantee full and equal access to quality education, health and other basic services for women and girls. They must also guarantee the freedom of movement, access to justice, access to economic opportunities, employment, and full and equal and meaningful participation in public life. Peace and sustainable development for Afghanistan cannot be achieved while we continue to see the systematic exclusion of half of the population. It is also a source of grave concern to note that 45% of the population of Afghanistan require humanitarian assistance. This in the midst of a crisis which is growing worse day by day. Against that backdrop, there must be a guarantee of full, unfettered, rapid humanitarian access in accordance with obligations under international humanitarian law. Colombia reiterates its appeal for the lifting of the restrictions which prevent Afghan women that work for the United Nations and non-governmental organizations. Restrictions that prevent them from doing that and prevent them from accessing UN facilities in Afghanistan. The exclusion of women from the humanitarian response compromises the scope and effectiveness of assistance. It limits women's and girls' access to what they need and ratchets up the risk of exclusion and gender-based violence. We must guarantee safe fora for women and girls and eliminate all restrictions which hamper the delivery of humanitarian assistance in an inclusive, effective and gender-sensitive way. The increase in factors which imperil efforts to meet basic human needs, that is, those of vast swathes of the population, including 2.9 million Afghan people that have returned to Afghanistan, require attention. Returned women and girls are additionally vulnerable due to discriminatory restrictions, due to barriers to reintegration, and due to limited opportunities. Colombia echoes the appeal made by the Secretary General to guarantee protection, including the principle of non-refoulement. We must ensure that returns are voluntary, safe, dignified, and supported by sustained assistance to ensure the integration of returnees. To conclude, I wish to reaffirm the role that continues to be played by UNAMA and the UN country team to facilitate dialogue, support the Afghan people, ensure there is a coordinated, consistent international approach, and broach central concerns such as the protection of human rights and protection against the adverse effects of climate change. An assistance mission with a robust mandate, with a human rights-oriented approach, an approach which is also gender-sensitive, continues to be necessary to achieve in Afghanistan peace, and this is important for the well-being of all of the Afghan people and regional stability. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Security Council. I give the floor now to the representative of Turkmenistan.
Madam President, at the outset, I thank Ms. Georgette Gagnon for the comprehensive briefing and commend the continued efforts of the UNAMA in facilitating dialogue and coordination among all stakeholders engaged on the Afghan track. As a neighboring country sharing a long border with Afghanistan, Turkmenistan remains deeply interested in the earliest possible stabilization and improvement of the situation in that country. Peace, security, and sustainable development in Afghanistan are directly linked to the security and prosperity of the entire region. Nearly 5 years have passed since the current de facto authorities assumed power in Afghanistan. During this period, various measures and countermeasures have been undertaken by different actors, yielding only limited and relative results. At the same time, the overall situation remains fragile and uncertain, with the prospect of prolonged challenges. In this regard, Turkmenistan believes that the international community should increasingly focus on practical and result-oriented approaches that can bring tangible benefits to the Afghan people, rather than measures that merely contribute to the adaptation of the de facto authorities to existing restrictions and pressures. From the standpoint of regional security, Turkmenistan, together with other Central Asian countries, places particular emphasis on maintaining and expanding trade, economic and infrastructure cooperation with Afghanistan. We are convinced that sustainable economic development, job creation, access to energy and transport connectivity constitute essential prerequisites for lasting peace and stability in Afghanistan. In this context, Turkmenistan continues to advance major regional infrastructure initiatives involving Afghanistan. These include the Topi gas pipeline, the Top power transmission project, as well as railway and transport connectivity projects. As of June 2026, approximately 130 kilometers of the challenging mountainous section of the Afghan segment of the Topi gas pipeline has been opened, with around 40 kilometers of pipeline already laid. Completion of this section is planned for December 2026. The work is also progressing on the railway extension from Akina to Anthoy, 23 kilometers towards Shibergan. The construction of the railway terminal in Turgundi is expected to be completed in December this year. We wish to emphasize that infrastructure and development projects have always served the people of a country rather than any particular regime or individual. Turkmenistan highly values the Doha process. At the same time, it may be useful to complement existing mechanisms with other regional formats. In this regard, consideration could be given to revitalizing broader regional consultations, such as 6+2 format involving Afghanistan's neighboring countries, Afghanistan and Russia. We remain concerned about the situation regarding the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan. While continued advocacy on this issue is important, additional practical measures should be undertaken to facilitate greater participation of Afghan women in educational, humanitarian, professional, and international engagement initiatives. In this regard, Turkmenistan stands ready to provide practical assistance and support efforts aimed at expanding opportunities for Afghan women in these areas. Madam President, in conclusion, Turkmenistan calls upon all stakeholders engaged on the Afghan track to intensify efforts aimed at identifying practical, balanced, and forward-looking approach toward Afghanistan, with the ultimate objective of ensuring peace, stability, and sustainable development for the Afghan people and the region as a whole. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Turkmenistan. I now give the floor to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
In the name of God, the compassionate and merciful, Madam President, thank you for convening this meeting. At the outset, we congratulate Colombia on assuming the presidency of the Security Council for this month. We also commend China for its effective leadership and successful presidency of the Council during the month of May. We thank Ms. Gagnon, Deputy Special Representative, and Ms. Osorno, Director, Crisis Response Division, for their insightful briefings. We listen to the statement delivered by Ms. Mehra. We take note of the Secretary General's latest report. The report indicates that Afghanistan continues to face complex challenges, including a deteriorating humanitarian and economic situation, affecting women and girls, and persistent threat posed by terrorist groups. At the same time, the report also notes certain areas of economic stabilization and efforts by de facto authorities to maintain the governance and advance economic activity, which deserve acknowledgement. Madam President, in this context, I wish to underline the following points. First, we remain concerned by worsening humanitarian and economic condition in Afghanistan. As of 30th April 2026, the Afghanistan humanitarian needs response plan remains significantly underfunded at 14%. We reiterate our call on the international community and donors to provide increased, predictable, and flexible funding to sustain life-saving humanitarian operations. Affairs aimed at economic recovery should be supported, assets frozen should be released unconditionally, and obstacles that hinder economic stabilization should be removed. Humanitarian assistance must remain impartial and free from politicization. Second, continued international engagement with the de facto authorities remains indispensable for advancing stability and addressing Afghanistan challenges. The Secretary General's report reaffirms the importance of the comprehensive approach of principled and pragmatic engagement. Constructive dialogue remains essential to address humanitarian, economic, counter-narcotic, and governance-related issues. In this regard, the Doha process continues to provide an important platform for practical cooperation. Iran has actively participated in the working groups of counter-narcotic and private sectors under this process and supports efforts aimed at enhancing regional and international cooperation. We welcome the significant reduction in opium poppy cultivation in Afghanistan, which represents an important achievement with positive global implication. However, as highlighted in the report, the economic consequences for rural communities remain severe without sustained investment in alternative livelihood. Rural development and access to the market, the improvement achievement may not be sustainable. We also note growing concerns regarding the expansion of synthetic drug production and trafficking, which require enhanced international cooperation. Third, the continued deprivation of women and girls of their fundamental rights remains a matter of concern. Restrictions on education, employment, freedom of movement, and participation in public life not only undermine human dignity but also hinder Afghanistan's long-term development and economic recovery. Such measures are incompatible with the true teaching of Islam. We call on the de facto authorities to remove these restrictions and to ensure that women and girls can enjoy their rights, including access to education and employment. Similarly, Afghanistan is an integral part of the region and Persian-rich and ancient civilization, and it is essential that the rights, identity, and cultural heritage of all ethnic and national communities in Afghanistan be fully respected and protected. We believe that the international constructive engagement remains the most effective means to encourage and promote the protection of human rights, including the right of women and ethnic and religious communities. Fourth, the security situation in Afghanistan remains a source of serious concern. The threat posed by the terrorist group, including ISIL-Khorasan, continue to endanger Afghanistan and wider region. Afghanistan must never become a safe haven for terrorism, nor should its territory but be used to threaten or undermine the security of other states, particularly in the neighboring countries. We also express concern over the recent tension between our two brotherly neighbors, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and welcome ongoing regional affairs aimed at promoting dialogue, confidence building, and lasting stability between them. We echo the Secretary General's call for restrained de-escalation and peaceful resolution of differences through dialogue and diplomacy. We welcome regional mediation efforts and encourage parties to pursue sustainable arrangements that promote stability and good neighborly relations. Fifth, neighboring countries continue to bear a disproportionate share of the consequences arising from the situation in Afghanistan. Regional cooperation mechanism and initiative like Neighboring Mechanism, Moscow Format, and Shanghai Afghanistan Contact Group therefore remain indispensable for promoting sustainable peace, security, and development in Afghanistan. The Islamic Republic of Iran, sharing a long border with Afghanistan, has for more than 4 decades hosted millions of Afghan nationals and provided them with access to education, healthcare, and other essential services. This long-standing commitment reflects Iran's continued dedication to supporting the Afghan people and contributing to stability and security in Afghanistan and broader region. The international community must provide greater support to countries hosting Afghan refugees and migrants. Finally, UNAMA continues to play a vital and dispensable role in supporting the Afghan people, facilitating dialogue, coordinating international assistance, and advancing a coherent international approach toward Afghanistan. In this context, the Special Representative plays a vital role in fostering constructive engagement with the de facto authorities. Iran supports the expeditious appointment of the qualified and suitable candidate while taking into account the views of consideration of Afghan authorities so as to facilitate effective dialogue and cooperation. We also reaffirm our support for the extension of UNAMA's mandate for its effective, impartial, and balanced implementation. In this regard, we appreciate the efforts of China as penholder in preparing and submitting the draft resolution to extend UNAMA mandate for an additional year, as well as its continued constructive engagement with other members of the Security Council throughout the negotiations process. Iran remains committed to close cooperation with the United Nations, neighboring countries, regional organizations, and all relevant stakeholders in pursuit of a stable, peaceful, and prosperous Afghanistan that is fully reintegrated into the international community. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and I wish to remind all speakers that they ought to limit their statements to no more than 3 minutes in order to ensure that the Council is able to do its work in a diligent fashion. I wish now to give the floor to Uzbekistan, the representative thereof.
Distinguished President of Security Council, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, with thanks Ms. Georgette Gagnon for her comprehensive briefing. Uzbekistan reiterates its strong support for the activities of UNAMA and welcomes its continued efforts to assist the Afghan people and facilitate constructive international engagement with Afghanistan. In this regard, we support the extension of UNAMA's mandate and the preservation of its central coordinating role in international efforts related to Afghanistan. We believe that the United Nations should continue to play a leading role in promoting a coordinated and balanced approach towards Afghanistan aimed at ensuring peace, stability, and sustainable development. Uzbekistan supports the Doha process as a principal international platform for engagement with the de facto authorities. We are convinced that long-term stability in Afghanistan cannot be achieved through humanitarian assistance alone. Greater attention should be devoted to economic recovery, job creation, infrastructure development, regional economic integration, and respect for women and girls' rights. In this regard, we underscore the growing importance of regional connectivity initiatives linking Central and South Asia. Projects in the fields of transport, trade, energy, and logistics can make a significant contribution to Afghanistan's economic resilience and long-term stability. We also note the increasing role of Central Asia countries in supporting Afghanistan through trade, humanitarian assistance, and practical cooperation. Uzbekistan remains committed to advancing regional connectivity, including the potential of the Termes International Transport and Logistics Hub and the Termes Dialogue on Connectivity between Central and South Asia. We further emphasize the importance of supporting sustainable economic development, expanding trade and transit opportunities, and strengthening Afghanistan integration into regional economic process. In this context, we welcome the growing recognition of the role of Central Asian countries in supporting Afghanistan's stability and development, and remain committed to further strengthening constructive regional cooperation. In conclusion, Uzbekistan stands ready to continue close cooperation with UNAMA, regional partners, and the international community in support of peaceful, stable, and economically self-sufficient Afghanistan. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Afghanistan. Many thanks to you.